friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. Welcome to some programming news. So I thought we'd start the week off with a stream where we just talk about what happened last week, what's going to happen this week, that kind of thing. I've got a few different sources we're going to pull from. I've got Reddit. I have a multi-Reddit called Stay Relevant that just has it's subscribed to a bunch of programming subreddits and programming languages, so we'll pull some news from there. We'll look at Best of JS. We'll also look at trending repositories on GitHub. And then if you have any suggestions, feel free to throw them out there. So if you do !submit with your suggestion to a news article or to a link. Oh yeah, we should definitely use Hacker News as well. News.ycombinator.com. We'll use this as well. But if you have a interesting tidbit of news, or if a library got a recent release that you'd like to talk about, feel free to do !submit. That'll show up here, and I'll pull from that list as well. I think we'll spend probably, I don't know, let's say 45 minutes just like finding news articles and like building up a list. And then after that, we'll spend about an hour kind of like diving into each one. So that's the plan for today. Welcome in, everyone. Glad to see all your smiling faces on this Monday morning. Alka says pompadour. Yeah, if you didn't tune in on Friday, I got a new haircut, and I cut it myself. So if I turn at certain angles, you'll see that it's not quite even. It's a bit of a mullet, a bit of like a really wide mohawk. I don't know. And thanks for that resub, Alka. Yeah, we got a bunch of resubs. Coding Tomato with the 15 months, Stony Eagle with the 13 months, Nefine with the 5, and Alka with the 29. Thank you all so much. Will I touch Rust or Go someday? I think I did some code wars in Rust, like some really basic problems. I probably will eventually. Yeah. I don't know if I'll dye my hair green again, because in order to dye it green, I had to bleach it. And then bleaching it like kills the hair. If you don't do it right, it kills the hair. Okay. Let's say hi to everyone. We'll welcome everybody in, and then feel free to start making suggestions. We'll definitely try to talk about this, SurrealDB and EdgeDB. I'll be honest, I don't really know much about these new like EdgeDB Edge database options. But we'll talk about it, and we'll talk about how I don't know much about them, and that'll be fun to talk about. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, so Alka might have been either the first or the second person ever to subscribe to the channel. I think they were the first, because I told them I enabled affiliate before anyone else. I'm pretty sure. We have a way to check that. I don't know. All right, let's say hi to everybody. If you'd like me to say hello to you, you can say hi, hello, hey, yo, cheers, greetings, hi, what's up, morning, afternoon, evening, howdy, good day, coding hi-yo f, vo hi-yo, or boga hey. Say any one of these things, I will acknowledge you. There's a manage founders page. Can you link me to that? But welcome in, Mark. Glad to have you. Also, the She-Boss, thanks for being here. What's up, Salahudin? Salahudin, welcome. And Demand, hello. What's up, Ulpris and Samfran and MD Subuntu and Irasa and Vulturebike and Stas and Stadi and Alf, welcome in. And Dev and Learnerbot and Pablo and Keishan and David, welcome in. Hello, Cesar and Oscar and Milin and Java and Cute Pony and Silver Designs. What's up, Yash and Rich Coates and Melinda and No Existence and Moss Dev and Ahasni and Lakshman and Limotes and Wattenvolt and Phoenix Rising and Puya and EOL and Moonlit Express and Uli and Hark and Hushu and Goodacre and Scuba Steve, welcome in. And what's up, Ex Palma and Ricky Yu and Palmise. Sawad Decrub. I don't know what that means, but welcome in. welcome in. And Matt Tivity Room, welcome in as well. And our Couldn't, welcome in as well. Yeah, I forgive you, Kingfish. Welcome in. All right. Is this going to expose anything? Let me hide my screen for a second. I mean, hopefully it won't. Wow. Yeah, Alka is definitely the first. Murdoch was the second. And then Bob was the third. Wow, that's cool to see. But yeah, Alka is definitely the oldest sub on the channel, for sure, for sure. Okay. Like I said, if you have some news or suggestions, feel free to do !submit. It'll show up here, and we'll talk about it. I'll say I do have on the list of things to talk about already. We have Linus Torvalds mentioned that Rust will be in the Linux kernel by 2023. This is big news because the Linux kernel, I believe, has just been C++ for the longest time. And this was just news that they're considering using Rust. It's in C? C. Wow. Okay. So we'll use that article from ZDNet. Because this happened at the Open Source Summit. And I believe the person that was interviewing actually was from ZDNet. So we'll talk about that. Uber exposed. Yeah, we'll talk about Uber as well. So there was some news on Uber. They were, yeah, I mean, this happened 3 days ago. Oh yeah, and then there's so yeah, I mean, and we have to decide, like, we have to draw a line, right? Because there's a niche that I don't think is being fulfilled as much in terms of programming news. Because like Rockstar getting hacked, like with the leak, is more of like tech news. And I did say we kind of would talk about tech news, but I want to keep it focused on things that are somewhat programming related. Like this is programming related because we all use Linux. And then the Uber thing, it's just interesting because I guess maybe this was the article that I saw that, well, maybe it was a Twitter thread, but it showed all of the stuff that they that they got access to. Yeah. Oh, no, and I appreciate the suggestion, Stati. And the Shivas. Thank you very much for that gift. Hearts in chat for the Shivas. Appreciate you. What do we know about this, though? I think it was like they got access to a bunch of internal systems, and they got access to like their AWS dashboard and stuff like that. I don't know, but that definitely happened. This is news in the definitely in the world of like web development style programming. The fact that Adobe acquired Figma, or is going to acquire Figma. Yeah, Figma to be acquired by Adobe 4 days ago. We're thrilled to announce Adobe's intent to acquire Figma. And I talked about this a little bit on stream last week, but I don't think it's a good thing. I think like I really like Figma. I've used it for a lot of things. And if you're familiar with the Adobe ecosystem, they try to wrap everything into like a monthly price style model. Hopefully it stays the same. Hopefully they don't remove too much. But yeah, it would have been nice if Figma stayed like a competitor. But I believe the deal is like $20 billion. But Sound of Gaming, thank you for that 19-month resub, which I cannot fathom that amount of money. Obviously, that doesn't all just go to one person. That's to purchase the entire company. But I'm sure a lot of the founders of the company are getting benefiting from it quite a bit, which is a good thing. They've never made a profit. Is that true though? The thing is, like, they have a free plan, but they only let you have like 3 projects. So I know of a lot of teams that pay for like team and enterprise stuff for Figma because they want to be able to collaborate and use it. So it seems like they would be profitable. I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea. Yeah, and we'll talk about Figma. For those of you that haven't used it, because I'll show you like what I've used it. What's up, Codex? Welcome in. But yeah, that's one thing we will talk about is Pinpot, and you can see it's actually on the list of trending repositories. It is an open source design and prototyping platform, and so a lot of people were like, "Well, we're jumping ship. We're not going to use Figma anymore because they're getting acquired. So we're going to get behind this open source project called Pinpot." It would be interesting to try this today, so I think I'll put it on the list so we can just install it, see what it's like. That would be pretty good to do. And do they have a hosted version too? I thought this would just be something you run locally. Get started. It's free. Wow, so you can register online. Wow. Wow, I thought this was something that you would like self-host or just like run locally. Huh, okay. Yeah, we'll definitely try it out then. Cool. And a few of the libraries and frameworks to talk about. So on Best of JS, Theater.js is the topmost starred project in the last 7 days. They've been gaining about 126 stars a day, and I've never heard of it. So we can see what it is. Motion design editor for the web.
Hi, this is Arya from Theater.js, the hackable animation editor for the web. So I'm going to take the next 4 minutes to show you how to animate beautiful 3JS scenes.
I'm going to plug in the sound so you can hear this. It's a keyframe editor for 3JS. Cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean, the fact that even stuff like this can run in the browser these days is kind of amazing. Yeah, so you get keyframes. You can do, like, tweening, which is an animation thing. Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's actually pretty cool. Yeah, so we'll show that. Maybe we'll look at it. Another one that was at the top of the most starred projects is In8In, a free and source available fair code license workflow automation tool. Oh, this is like a replacement for If This Then That. I think I saw this. Yeah, and it's totally open source. So you can say, like, when I receive a webhook, modify the incoming data and then send it to my Postgres database, but also send it to my Google spreadsheet. And then if some value is equal to some other value, then send a Slack message. Is it pronounced Nate? Probably. Nathan? Natin? But this looks pretty slick. And if you haven't heard of If This Then That, it's a similar like host like platform as a service. If This Then That. ITTT? If, oh gosh. There it is. And then I've never heard of Pipe Dream. Nation? Maybe it's Nation. I don't know. Pipe Dream. Connect APIs remarkably fast. Cool. Yeah, I've never seen that one either. Theater.js is cool. Been following since the early days. Yeah, we'll check it out. I don't do much 3D stuff. But for people that do, it seems pretty interesting. nm.xyz. I've never heard of that one. Yeah, I guess like that's an interesting type of workflow that we're gonna start seeing is like using Stable Diffusion to generate the initial art, and then an actual artist will import that and modify it, and then also like use that as assets. I read something about there were some games being released where all of the assets were created using Stable Diffusion. The first composable CSS Animation Toolkit. Wow. I'll be honest, I also haven't messed with a lot of CSS animations. I think the Well, dang it! I closed my chat. But I think the most CSS animation stuff I've done is just with like Vue.js's transition group. I have not done a lot of like UI animations and like subtle UI animations and stuff like that. Cool. Let's see what else is at the top of JS list. We talked about Tari a few weeks ago. I will give my two-minute opinion on it. Oh, I should link the website, tari.app. Cool. Great projects die when companies decide to milk them for money and then open source alternatives rise. Yeah, that kind of seems to happen for a lot of things. Yeah. The Mixed Use says Tari is actually the reason I started learning Rust. Well, that's good. Yeah, I think if you want some like high performant desktop stuff, but you want to build the UI with web, it seems like a good option. But for the stuff that I've done with Electron, for me, it's not. I mean, I'll I'll go ahead and talk about it. But for me, it's not worth. I don't see it as worth my time learning the entire like Tari API for like how they do lower level stuff, and then also potentially having to learn Rust to do lower level stuff. All of the Electron apps that I've built don't require that kind of performance, and I don't mind them taking up a little bit of RAM. Like, it's fine. And so a few weeks ago, whenever I tried Tari, that was the main thing that I butted heads against, is like I was not familiar with their file system API, and so it took me quite a bit of time just to figure out how do you write to the file system using the Tari API, and making sure that I had all the right permissions set and everything like that. Which seems like it could be useful for some apps, but for the kind of things that I've built with like Electron and stuff like that, if I really wanted to benefit from not having such a big bundle size and not embedding Chromium, there's also DeskGap, which is one option, which I think may not be as updated, but there's also Neutralino JS, which follows a similar pattern as Tari, in that it doesn't embed an entire Chromium instance. It will just use the operating system's built-in web view. Yeah, and actually, Oscar, that's actually how this thing will work as well. So instead of having like a custom runtime, you just build a server that runs locally to serve the UI. Neutralino doesn't support Node? Come on. Oh, well, I mean, I guess I haven't used it, but they support using, or like building an API, and that API can do Node stuff. See, they have like file system and clipboard and stuff like that. I don't know. The thing is, yeah, I mean, people complain about taking up too much RAM and stuff like that, and obviously, like, solutions that don't take up as much RAM are great, because we've fallen into this like, oh, well, computers have enough RAM, so I don't care. But I have 2 Electron apps running on my desktop right now. I've got VS Code, that's an Electron app, and then I have my chat services here. That's an Electron app as well. And then if I open Discord, that's also an Electron app. And this is a 7-year-old computer that I'm using right now, and it works fine. It works fine with all of those things running. Obviously, like, that is kind of like a defeatist attitude. You're like, yeah, well, who cares? We'll use a bunch of RAM. And it is nice that options like this are popping up. But, yeah. Is this to do with automation? I think we got off that. Create beautiful applications using Go. Cool. And it is cool that things like this are popping up, because it's almost like how you might build a web API backend with Go and then a front end. And so there are developers that are already doing that, and so now they can take that skill set and build a desktop app instead. Similar thing with Tari and Rust. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and like that's the other issue. If you're using the web view provided by the operating system, you could run into compatibility issues or unsupported features that you're not aware of unless you're doing a lot of testing on every single operating system. Whereas with Electron, it ships a predictable version of Node.js and a predictable version of Chromium. So, yeah, the thing is, we could talk about this all day. I know a lot of developers are very passionate about the fact that Electron uses too much memory and all that stuff, but I don't know. My favorite framework for desktop apps, I mean, right now it's just Electron because that's what I have the most familiarity with. I think I would probably try Neutralino.js if I were to build another desktop app now. I don't think I would rewrite this app, especially because I have the transparent window. I don't know if you can do that with some of the other platforms. Like, I want this window to be transparent. It's a desktop app that's transparent, and I can do that with Electron. I don't know if I can do it with some of these other platforms, and that was one of the hardest things to figure out, was trying to get a transparent window. So, that's a thing. Yeah. Heroku stopping tree services. Yeah, I talked about that a few weeks ago, and we specifically pointed to Midu Dev, who had a tweet on it. It is in Spanish, but they link a bunch of options, and then I also link those options in here as well. Definitely look at that. Look at this list. I'm using Render for a database, a Postgres database right now. It seems to work just fine. It's actually so easy to get set up. Not Render. Sorry, I'm using Railway. I'm using Railway for my database. If I want to deploy a Node app, I'll probably try Fly or Render. The thing is, these days, because, like, you could use something like Versal, which does, like, Lambda functions, but it does it in a way that's somewhat transparent to you. Like, you don't have to care how it deploys all of these Lambda functions. But if you write your code in a way that is supported by Lambda functions, then you can just use a deployment service like this, and you don't need a Node.js server running 24/7, which is what you would have gotten with Heroku. It's basically something that runs 24/7, except if you were on the free tier, it would go to sleep. But these days, there are so many options for running backend code that doesn't require a server that's always on. The caveat is you specifically have to write your application to run within that context. But if you do that, then you can use tools like Versal or even Netlify, or even Cloudflare Workers or Deno Deploy. All of these do, not glitch, but all of these do serverless or even like edge function kind of things. And so you don't need a Node.js server running all the time. And if you can write your app that way, then these services, you can pretty much just stay on the free tier for most small apps. So, yeah. Yeah, glitch is definitely for people that are learning to code. Yeah, I don't think they're trying to market themselves as any sort of like professional deployment tool or anything like that. But if you are learning to code, if you're in a coding school and like you're learning about Node.js and backend, glitch is a really easy way to get up and going, and you just have a Node.js server running in the cloud. But yeah, they definitely, they're not trying to market themselves as a deployment option. Like you essentially get like an inline editor in the browser, but that code is actually running on a backend server. So yeah. Then open Discord. I don't want to open Discord. I'll what do you call it? I'll bite. I'll take into the I don't know. So I just opened Discord and my RAM usage increased by 4%. I will humor you. Thank you, no Codex. I couldn't come up with the word. So my RAM usage was at 67%. I opened Discord and now it's at 71%. I mean, obviously, if I do more stuff, it's going to start using more RAM. I don't know. Oh, Spotify isn't Electron, is it? I always thought Spotify was like a C++ app. like a Qt app or something like that. I don't know. But, you know. What actually is an Electron app? It is a Chromium instance that has some APIs within it that allow you to run code in a back-end process that has full access to your operating system. So you can write web code like it's desktop code. How would you try to get some users for a closed alpha of a JavaScript library? Well, you need to find users that are interested in the thing that you're building, right? Like users that would benefit from the thing that you're building. And how do you find them? I don't know. I mean, you could ask on our Discord. But also, if you're trying to have it like a closed alpha, you're probably trying to be somewhat secretive about it. So yeah, I've never done anything like that, so I don't have any good advice for you. But I would say, oh, this got blocked. I'll let you say ramhog. I was like, AutoMod did not like the word hog. But yeah, I don't. Anybody in chat, do you have any good ideas for? Let's say you're writing a JavaScript library. You don't want to make it open source or release it to the world just yet. You want some people to try it out. What would you do? Yeah. I think if you're a Go developer, Wells looked pretty interesting. That's that desktop thing for Go. AcidSpark says, I got annoyed at work because I'm not in an actual dev position. My system is so locked down, it's hard to create custom tools to make my job easier. I know the feels. I mean, this would have been 7 years ago. I was working a job at a very large enterprise, and everything was extremely locked down. And it made sense because, like, imagine just your average user not being that locked down. It poses a threat to the company, because if they get any sort of malware or viruses of some kind on their machine that's connected to an internal network, that could really wreak some havoc. So I basically had like Nannyware running on my Windows machine that would detect any time an executable was launched or any time you did certain things, and it would block that executable from running. Eventually, I got an exception because I was a developer and I was writing custom executables, so I needed to be able to do that. But most people at the company were locked down. Yeah. We'll talk. Yeah, I will try to talk about that because Dev asked the question, what are my thoughts on SurrealDB and EdgeDB and the current state of databases in general? Yeah, so we'll get to that after we list a few more libraries. Yeah. Yeah, that's the other crazy thing about Railway. Just go to their website, and they will just give you a container running in the cloud. And you don't even have to sign up. You have 24 hours to claim the thing, otherwise it just gets wiped and discarded. Yeah. You remember back in the days of they used to be called Now. So before Versal was called Versal, they were called now.sh, and you could literally just give them a Docker file and they would spin up a Docker container in the cloud. But then they ended that and they shifted towards Lambda functions, and now Edge functions. You can do either Lambda or Edge functions. And Lambda functions are just, Edge functions are just Lambda functions distributed all around the world that are really close to your users. Yeah. In general, Glitch, I think, has some good stuff. Yeah, and like that's the other thing about like apps we write these days. Like really the only thing that needs to be running on a server 24/7 is something that requires a long-running process or some kind of persistent connection. So if you're building an app that uses WebSockets, it's tricky, if not impossible, to try doing that with Lambda functions, because the Lambda functions go down. Like they fall asleep, or they spin down when they're not being used. So you need a server running 24/7 if you want that kind of thing. Everything else could be rewritten to work with Lambda functions. The tricky part is just reworking it, right? You'd have to essentially rewrite a lot of code bases. Yeah. Chrome is using 7 gigs of RAM. Wow. Yeah. Spotify is Electron? I had no idea. I've written some Android stuff years ago. 8 years ago. And I use Java. I haven't tried, what's the new one? Whatever the new one is that they use instead. I haven't tried it. It'd be interesting to try. Yeah, you can use any web technologies with Electron. You would still need a build process. Not Flutter. Somebody probably just said it. Android programming language. Kotlin. Kotlin is the one. Yeah, you guys got it, Kotlin. Yeah. It's simple. Just download viruses. Yeah. Thoughts on Web3 tech and DAOs? What's a DAO? Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I have not spent any time learning about crypto, Web3 tech, or anything like that. The thing is, like, it'll probably take off, and then I'll probably be completely irrelevant because I won't know how to build. Well, at least for a little while, I'll be irrelevant because I won't know how to build distributed technologies, or how to build with distributed technologies. I'm just ignorant to all of this stuff because I haven't spent any time learning about it. It's a pretty deep rabbit hole once you start getting into it. So yeah, no opinions on it. One opinion I have is like, I don't like that they took the name Web3. So if you remember, Web 2 was, Web 2.0, I think was when like Twitter launched, and what were some other apps that like launched around the era of Web 2.0? And that's also like when we were starting to get more like HTML5 features and like Canvas, and basically like there were so many things you could do with just web that you didn't need plugins like Flash or anything like that anymore. That was Web 2. I guess was MySpace Web 2? I don't know, but that was Web 2. And then now they're trying to claim the name Web 3. I don't know if they can do that. I don't know. Like, obviously they can. They have a Wikipedia article on it. But basically, like, even by claiming that it's Web 3, they're basically saying that this is the next step. This is how all apps will be built. And I just don't know if that's the case. I think, like, in general, decentralization is good, right? Because then you're not dependent on large companies, and you're not dependent on centralization. But is that the next step? I don't know. Is there something better? Maybe. I don't know. They've got a Wikipedia article on it. Wow, you've given me 10,000 bits before, Fireball Monkey. Thank you. That's a lot of bits. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other interesting aspect of it, which actually, like, I'm not opposed to, though, because, so, like, one of the things that I think really does need to change about the web is the fact that everything runs on advertising, and everything runs off of your data. Like, if something is free, you're basically paying for it with your data. Usually through some sort of advertisement that's directly targeted at you, and you're more likely to spend on that or like engage with that advertisement because it is so targeted. And the majority of the web works on that. So the idea that like Web3 involves decentralization and then potentially also integrates like crypto payments. And I mention that because someone said, I don't like it because you're dependent on the currency that it's built with, and then also it has just everything's being monetized because it has to do with crypto. But I don't think that's the end of the world. Like, I would be okay with a world where I had to pay 10 cents to watch a YouTube video. Now, obviously, not everyone is financially capable of paying 10 cents for every YouTube video that you watch, but I would much rather pay 10 cents than have to be advertised at, or have to and basically like give my data to the company so that they can let me do that thing for free. And this also gets into the idea of like microtransactions, which never took off. People have always talked about microtransactions, like, since the early days of the web, and it never took off. Basically, like, the advertising, everything that's like $10 a week. That's not horrible, though. Like, Sound of Gaming, do you buy Starbucks coffee? Like, or like, is there anything you buy on a regular basis that's just like, yep, this is what I need to survive, and so I'll pay. That's what I'm gonna pay. I don't know. And I think, like, obviously, like, I mean, I haven't figured out the business model, right? But you could come up with, I don't have kids. But that's the other interesting thing, though, is, like, the kids are watching all of these YouTube videos, so then they would have to pay it. Free is better than paying... Wait. But you're missing the point, because it's not free. It's literally not free. Like, you think that it's free because you don't have to pay any actual money, but you're paying for it with your data. Right? But speaking of kids, so I've been watching, if you go on YouTube, you can find like 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 10-hour videos that are someone basically just recorded their television back in 2001 or back in... Just pick a year, and you can find somebody that's uploaded a YouTube video that's like Saturday morning cartoons or like Nick at Night. And I've been watching that recently. And it's just a real... No, I haven't been watching... Stop it. I haven't been watching... It's been a real nostalgia kick because you see all of the old advertising. And I was talking about it with my partner, though. Like if you watch like the Saturday morning cartoon... it's not even a compilation. It happened on TV. It was just recorded. But all of the advertising is targeted at children, right? You've got cereal commercials, snack commercials, toy commercials, and they're all like... I mean, I obviously didn't think about this when I was a kid, but it kept you entertained in between the show, right? Like, you're watching the show, and it's like, it's cartoons, and there's funny voices and funny noises, and it's entertaining. And then the commercials look the exact same. So, like, for a kid, they can't even tell the difference between when they're being advertised to versus the actual, like, entertainment that they're watching. I don't know. But yeah, that's another interesting thing. It's like if you just keep YouTube playing in the background, then you rack up a bill. But yeah, I got sidetracked. But like, if you really wanted to come up with like a way for people to pay for it without having to watch advertising or without having to sell their data, then you could come up with a monthly payment amount, right? Like Netflix. Like, I don't think I would be opposed to paying similar to what I pay for Netflix monthly, based on all of the YouTube that I consume. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I do pay for YouTube Premium, so I guess that's actually the answer, right? Is YouTube Premium. I don't know. And I think, yeah, obviously you can block the ads, and I mean, and I do. I've talked about it before. You can see that I have uBlock Origin installed, but that gets around the point of we need a better way to monetize apps. We need a different model. Like, basically, and I think that's why it's going to be so hard for anything, even like for anything like microtransactions or any sort of like Web3 payment stuff to be adopted, because most people are so accustomed to everything being free in quotes. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what you're asking here, Hako, but I haven't used Go. No. Yeah. Thoughts on OpenWRT to do the blocking of ads directly on the router? Yeah, you can use just like a locally hosted DNS server, like on your local network. Send all of your DNS requests there, and then that little DNS server can basically fail to respond for anything that are known advertisers. So you can do that with like a Raspberry Pi. What do they call it? Pi-hole? Or if you have a router with custom firmware, they probably have a way to do it there too. There also might just be publicly hosted DNS servers that do ad blocking, and then if you just change your network settings to use that DNS, you could benefit from it. Yeah, What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so I have a hardware firewall in my house, and I configure, and like that controls, that has the DHCP server for all of the devices on my network, even like the wireless clients. And I set the DNS settings there, so every single device on my network is using the DNS settings of my firewall. Yeah. How do I block Twitch ads? I pay for Twitch Turbo. I literally, if a service offers a monthly payment, I will pay it so that I don't have to see ads. So if you have Twitch Turbo, you actually don't get ads anywhere on Twitch, and even for people that you're not subscribed to. Obviously, I subscribe to a lot of people as well, and then you don't get ads that way. I guess that's another thing as well. Is yeah, I'll link to Twitch Turbo. So you pay like, I think it's like $9 a month, and you don't get ads anywhere. Honestly, the main reason that I signed up is, even as a Twitch affiliate, because I had Twitch Turbo, my VODs will stick around for 60 days. Now I'm a partner, so I don't need that anymore because my VODs will stick around for 60 days automatically. But if you sign up for this and you're an affiliate, then you get 60 days of storage instead of 14. And I think they even lowered it recently. This might be out of date because I believe, well, no, maybe for affiliates you get 14 days, but for non-affiliates you only get like 7 days of storage. I don't know. It's still, yeah, I still have it. Like if you look at my chat identity, I have the turbo emote. Yeah. Okay. I got way behind on chat. I probably missed some stuff. Oh, there's a Web 5? I don't know. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna skip some of the more recent chats just so we can keep moving. Yeah. I declare chat bankruptcy. Yeah, shouts out to Clarkio, who I got the term from. Again, I don't know if he got the term from anyone else, but I learned about chat bankruptcy from them. Can I briefly explain Lambda functions? Yeah, let's do it. Let's do like a little explainer video. And also, I mean, the term, like the hot term, what's I can't come up with, I can't think today. What do you call this? Buzzword. The buzzword is serverless functions, but really these are also known as Lambda functions. Yeah, well, I'll try to do a short YouTube video. The thing is, like, if you've been paying attention to my YouTube channel, I haven't uploaded any short videos recently. I did a bunch of short, like I tried to do short content and then I never edited it into a video to be uploaded. So maybe we'll do this because I know a lot of people are curious about serverless functions. They're basically just, they're Lambda functions. That's one and the same. And then also we can talk about edge functions. And then we also can talk about services that allow you to use them. Yeah, serverless is the general term. Lambda, did Lambda originate at AWS? I guess Lambda is also just like a general programming term of a function. And so these are basically cloud functions. That's, I mean, even cloud is a buzzword, but if you want the easiest definition for what a serverless function or what a Lambda function is, it is a cloud function. So you probably, at this point, somewhat kind of understand what the cloud is. It's basically a server hosted somewhere else. And this allows you to write one little function that's hosted on that server, and then you can actually invoke that function via a web request. So it is an RPC, or a remote procedure call, which is another term that's been thrown around a lot recently because you've probably heard of TRPC, and then people have been talking about, well, what about gRPC? But both of these are a technology that allow you to do this thing called remote procedure call. And if we're going to break this down further, a procedure is just another word for a function. So we could call this a remote function call, or a remote function invocation. Invocation? Invocation. Yeah. And really, like if you want to break that down even further, is invoke a function on some remote server using an HTTP request. That's what a remote procedure call is. This is this is what a serverless function is. It allows you, and you basically define those functions on the remote server. I realize I'm just like getting into the definition here. Yeah, like we're rabbit holing, but I have a feeling that this cleared that up for quite a few people just now, because that's remote procedure call is a very general term. Like you could even have a remote procedure call that doesn't happen over the web, but these days it's happening over the web. So what's the difference between Lambda, grpc, and trpc? Okay, I guess I did potentially confuse you. So let's take a step back. Let's take a step back. grpc and trpc are two separate frameworks for building out web-based remote procedure calls. I only mention these because these are ones that people talk about a lot lately. Basically, forget the specifics. So forget TRPC and forget grpc. We're specifically just talking about RPC. And if you look at RPC on Wikipedia, I can't say words today. Remote procedure call. In distributed computing, a remote procedure call is when a computer program causes a procedure or a subroutine or a function, procedure, subroutine, function, and they're all the same word, to execute in a different address space, commonly on another computer or on a shared network. So that's what all of this is. That's what all of this is. And then and that's basically what I'm saying. Like you're going to see these words: Lambda function, edge function. We're going to list services like. So we'll fill out that list. Cloud functions. I don't know. I guess Cloudflare has cloud functions, is what they call it. But all of these are just other ways to obviously. So for a few of these, there are specifics. Like edge functions are there's more to it than it just being the same thing. But these are other things. Other ways to call it. We can group these all together. These are all they all do a very similar thing with some caveats, but they all fall under this idea of serverless. And in general, a serverless it does not mean no server. It typically means a server that is not running 24/7. Meaning it is on-demand computing, or really like on-demand remote procedure calls. All right, I missed a bunch of chats, but yeah. So what's the difference between Lambda and grpc, trpc? You could host grpc or trpc as a Lambda function or as an edge function or as a cloud function. Those are specific technologies that allow you to implement remote procedure calls with some back-end language. Ultimately, after you write that code, you need to host it somewhere, and you technically could host them as Lambda functions or as edge functions. So yeah, I guess I will make I don't know. Maybe I don't want to make a YouTube video about this. At this point, it was just like a brain dump. And Halit, thank you very much for that Prime sub. So I kind of just brain dumped there. We can talk more about it, but we're getting away from news, and we should probably talk about news. When a request comes in, spin up the function, respond, spin down the function. Who cares about news? Let's build an app. Yeah, I mean, I think most people are here to just kind of like hang out anyways. So this is what happens with serverless. So instead of having a server that's running all the time, and think of it like it's a Linux machine or whatever, but it's a machine that's running 24/7, and on that machine you have your Node.js process running that's running your Express app or whatever. That's the old way, or like, it's not even the old way. We still do this, but it's just a different way of doing it. So, right, that runs 24/7, and if you're paying your infrastructure bill, you pay for the fact that that computer was running for 24/7 for an entire month, let's say. Lambda functions or serverless functions make it potentially cheaper to run your app because it does all of this transparent to you. Basically, you deploy to some serverless provider, and what happens is when a request comes in for your app, they will spin up a server specifically for that one incoming request. They'll respond, and then they'll spin it back down. Now, this is also with some caveats because there's this idea of like hot start or cold start. And sometimes if they spin up the function, they'll actually wait before they spin it down, and then it can actually serve multiple requests. And then if the requests stop coming in, then they'll spin it down. But at the end of the day, one of the reasons we would do this is because of price. So if you know that you're only going to be getting a certain number of requests per month, and that's actually going to be cheaper than just running a server 24/7, you would set it up this way. The other benefit you get is potentially scaling, because you've written your app this way where it can just spin up and then spin back down. If your app is all of a sudden has an influx of like 10,000, 20,000 requests, your backend provider could actually spin up 100 instances of this function to respond to everyone and then spin them back down. And so you basically get like instant scaling as well. Whereas if you wanted to scale this way, you would need to have all of those servers running ahead of time. Yeah, and so that's what gets into the idea of like cold starts, which is initial request takes a little longer because you have to spin up the thing. But if you're okay with that, then that's why you would want to do something like this. Yeah, I'm here to hang out and procrastinate from working. I think a lot of people are. All right, I think that's all I'm going to say about serverless because I want to talk about more news. But if you learned something from this quick aside on serverless functions or whatever else, can you just type 1 in chat? Or if you didn't learn anything and you're happy to be here, just put a smile in chat. Yeah, and so that's the other aspect, and like that's another thing to think about is because this thing has to spin up, because this thing has to spin up and then spin back down, you can't do things like persistent connections, right? So like if you have a WebSocket server, that thing does need to be running 24/7 because every user that connects to the socket server needs to have a persistent connection. That server needs to stay up. Whereas if you're doing this, then you can't have a persistent connection. So any sorts of like real-time things, you typically wouldn't write this way. You could. I believe AWS API Gateway and AWS Lambda has a way of doing WebSocket connections, but it's not as easy as just keeping your server up. Yeah, but I'll be honest, like I don't know much about the HTTP2, or isn't that like server sent events or something like that? Can you do that with Lambda functions? That still seems to me like you would need a long running process. I don't know. Let's see if there's any other news that we're going to talk about. Is Lambda getting deprecated soon? Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Yeah, and I can also just talk about TRPC because I mentioned it, and then some people are like, "What the heck is TRPC?" TRPC is a way of building backend APIs with TypeScript, but one of the benefits you get is because of the way that you write that backend API, you get a bunch of types and type completion that can also be used on the client. So if you're building a separate API with, let's say, like Express and a separate front end with, let's say, React, if you want to make the request from your React app to your backend, you typically have to like extract the types to a shared library and then make sure that both the front end and the back end are using those types. With TRPC, you just get that by default. So you can see basically your back end would look like this. So when I receive a request for hello, it should take in an object that has an input property that has a text property on it. And I'm going to return an object that has a text property on it. So think of this like an Express app with a route /hello that takes in a request body that is a JSON object and responds with a JSON object. So this is, but if you write it this way, you now get this type called app router. You then pull that type into your front end code and you use their create TRPC client. And now it's fully typed. So if you look at this auto completion here, when you do client.query, it knows what all of the available queries are. And you can see as they're changing the types on the left-hand side, you get type errors on the right-hand side because it's like, oh, well, the API definition changed. So with TRPC, it's a really cool and really nice development workflow because you don't have to generate client code or anything like that. You basically literally just use the types that are generated. Not even generated. You use the types that are defined, and they give you a client that automatically is fully typed based on that. So Grpc, you could probably do a similar thing, but the thing of, and that's one of the major reasons why people like TRPC is because there is no code generation. And that's another concept that something like Grpc does use. And the idea with code generation is anytime your backend API changes, you need to regenerate the client code that's going to be used to talk to that backend code, which for some projects is fine because you probably have like a separate backend versus front end process. So you go to the backend, you make the updates, you regenerate the client code. Now you go to your client code and you edit. But if you're constantly switching between front end and back end, that's going to be a little bit cumbersome because you have to regenerate the client code every time. With this, there's no generation. You literally export a type, you import the type, and now you can instantly use it. And that's why you like in your code editor, you could have your front end and your back end code open, change one, and the other one is instantly going to show you type errors. Whereas with Grpc, like if we search for Grpc TypeScript or Grpc Node, there's going to be a process of actually generating that client-side code because Grpc has like their own custom schema with this proto file, so it defines all of the various types, it defines the services and their methods. But then if I want to write, let's say, a Node.js client library for this service definition, I need to run a command that will literally generate all of the code. So it'll let's say it generates an Axios. Well, it generates a class that has properties on it: get song, add songs, get chat. And then inside of that, it has an Axios method that makes an HTTP request to those endpoints. But that code has to be generated. I need to run a command line thing that will generate that code that I can then use in my backend code. Yeah, so you can see this has the JavaScript code generation and the TypeScript code generation. So work on your backend code, run this, that will generate your client-side library, and then you can import that client-side library into your project. So, but people really like Grpc because it has client generators for so many different programming languages. And TRPC is specific to TypeScript. And they're trying to solve that. Like if you look at their GitHub repo, they're extremely active. They have issues open that are like, yeah, eventually we want to be able to generate types for all kinds of things. So you could have a client that is Go or Rust, and we could generate that for you. Yeah, a high-performance open-source universal RPC framework. But if you look at the docs, you can see that they have support for all of these different languages, but that means they need a client generator for all of these different languages. So, yeah. All right. We talked about that because TRPC has been getting at least 73 stars a day for the past week. Cool. Let's look at this library. Every programmer should know. And I sent these 3 links in my newsletter that I send out weekly. I sent that probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But if you want to receive my newsletter, you can sign up there. I don't spam you. I try to sometimes be a little bit funny, and I only send you 1 email a week. Unless you sign up for the live notifications. I send those every time I go live. But I don't think I've seen this one. So this is a repo called Every Programmer Should Know, a collection of technical things every software developer should know about. Algorithms, data structures, numbers, strings, time. Cool. This is like one of those awesome lists. Yeah. Oh, no worries, the Shibas. I have, so, and that's, so, another shout out for me, I guess, is that I have a schedule up. I'm streaming every single day this week, so definitely tune in when you can. But both Tuesday and Thursday mornings are going to be working on specifically stream-related stuff. So I'm going to try to fix the issues with my mailing server and stuff like that. It is pretty nice to look at. Man, Coding Garden's going to be live every single day this week. No, this isn't Lotus. This is the default Google Calendar embed that you get. Lotus 123. That's an old reference. I actually worked at a company that was transitioning away from Lotus 123 to Outlook when I joined. That was a thing. So I use yeah, I'm streaming 2 times tomorrow. Oh, I forgot that I was logged in. You can see my metrics. I just want to show you the tool that I use. Yeah, so ListMonk is self-hosted. So you can, this lets you manage your mailing list subscribers and then all of like the campaigns that you're sending. But the reason you would want to use software like this is because to be compliant, you want people to be able to easily unsubscribe from your mailing list. And this gives you that option. So like when people sign up, in every newsletter that I send out, there's a link at the bottom that says unsubscribe. And then you can click that, and then that takes you to this app, which manages all of that. But if you want to actually send the emails, that has to do with, I think they're called transports. And you could set that up with whatever you want, or messengers. They call them messengers. And so, and that requires an SMTP server or a mail server. What you probably should, like, don't do what I did. Just use Amazon simple email service. If you're sending it from an EC2 server, I think you can send up to like 10,000 emails for free every month. And one of the issues you'll run into when you're trying to send emails is the IP address that those sent emails are coming from needs to have a good reputation. Because there's this whole infrastructure of block lists and spam prevention, whereas like if a specific IP address has been known to send spam, then it's on a bunch of potential block lists. And a lot of block lists are automated. Like if a IP address isn't sending spam for a certain amount of time, it'll get removed. But regardless, if you're on one of those lists, then the emails you send could go to the spam folder, which is one of the issues that we've been having, which I tried to fix. But if you use a service like this, you can also buy a dedicated IP address with a known good reputation, and it costs a little bit more. Well, you would need to combine the two. So ListMonk just gives you list management and campaign management. You still need some way of sending an email. And I'm suggesting use Amazon SES. They're also just like Mailgun and SendGrid. These are basically email APIs as a service. So you can just make an HTTP post request to their endpoint with your API key, and it will send an email. And you can integrate these with ListMonk as well. But these are also nice because they have known good reputation. Yeah, I think that's the thing, Mysterious, is if you're sending emails and they're not going to spam, then yeah, you got lucky with whatever dedicated IP address you have. Yeah, both SendGrid and Mailgun, and I think even like Twilio has email. And Twilio, all of these are paid. Like sending emails is really hard to do for free if you want it to have a good reputation, because all of these, they've managed their reputation. SendGrid is Twilio now? Okay. And there's probably other ones that you could look at. All of the ones that I've mentioned, I'm not endorsing them in any way. I'm just saying they exist. And then I'm not really even endorsing Amazon SES. I'm just saying that if I had to choose again, I would probably do this. Because what I'm actually doing is I'm using shared hosting. And that is an issue because other people use the same server as me. And other people like to do bad things. But it literally only costs me $5 a month, regardless of how many emails I send. Like, eventually, I could have an email list of 100,000 people, and I wouldn't have to pay any more than $5 a month. And they have some really generous limits on emails that you can send. So, if you look at emails, you can send up to, I think it was like 10,000 emails per hour. Whereas if you look at a lot of other services, they're going to limit you to like maybe 1,000 emails per hour or even 500 emails per hour. Right now, I only have 400 people on my list, so I don't even need to care about that, but I was planning for the future. And one thing that I did was I purchased a dedicated IP address for this stellar business hosting plan, and that was only $2 a month. So for $7 a month in an ideal world where my IP address was didn't have a bad reputation, I could literally send millions of emails for $7 a month. That was my initial plan anyways. But there's a block list specifically that blocks entire providers if some IP addresses from that provider have sent spam. And that's the issue that I'm running up against right now. Is there is a block list out there that has blocklisted any server running on Namecheap, regardless of if they've done anything bad, because what they claim is that Namecheap doesn't take spam seriously, and because there's so many spammers that originate from these IP addresses, they're just going to block all of them anyways. It's really lame. And I looked into that specific block list, and so many people are like, yeah, it's a scam. Like, you can technically pay a certain amount per month to whitelist your individual IP address, but it's kind of crazy that email clients even subscribe to that block list because they're kind of extorting people for money. Yeah. Yeah, and then that's the other thing if you're dealing with IP reputation is you can, there's some websites that will search across all those block lists. Yeah. Oh, see, that's the issue. So I think I need to update the page, but if you mark it not as spam, any future emails probably will likely not get put into spam. But the other thing you can do is if you add cj@coding.garden to your contacts, then it shouldn't go to spam because I'm in your contacts. What do you mean, Oscar? That's just bullying? Oh, the block list thing? Yeah. And what's up, One Computer Guy? Welcome in. Yeah, Namecheap technically does have an email service, but the limits were much lower. And yeah, and I think I would have run into the same issue because yeah, Namecheap also has I think they call it private email. Yeah, it's called private email. Yeah, it is really bullying and all that good stuff. But I had subscribed to this in the past, but if you look at their email sending limits, I think this one was limited to like 500 emails per hour or something like that. I don't know. I'm okay. I'm done talking about that. That's my knowledge dump of all of the email stuff. And we've talked about that. Is I could create like a WhatsApp group or a Telegram group and send messages there. Yeah. I was looking into Zoho as well. Because they had a decent pricing plan, but I don't know, like, again, you're going to run into certain sending limits, right? So, like, once your email list gets big enough, yeah, you're going to run into limits of how many you can send per hour, and then if you send over a certain amount, you might be charged, like, overage charges. Yeah. But, yeah, so whenever you sign up for my mailing list, you will have to hit the front confirmation email. Yeah. Zoho is not a good service to use. Price is far too high. Yeah, I mean, yeah. The other thing that I haven't mentioned at all is you could use a software as a service. So something like Mailchimp is software as a service. You pay a monthly fee. They handle everything. They give you a dashboard. They give you a sign-up page for the people that want to subscribe to your mailing list. But it costs a lot of money. It's going to cost a whole lot more than if you're trying to use like an email sender and like a self-hosted thing. So for $17 a month, you can have up to 500 people on your list. And yeah, good to go. I guess technically you could also do essentials, but yeah, at that point you'd max out at 50,000 subscribers on the mailing list. But that starts to add up, and like the bigger that your list gets, like I would already be on this tier with the number of people that have signed up for my mailing list. And like eventually I'll probably have a few thousand people on my mailing list, and I don't want to be paying $300 a month. Like I'm just thinking towards the future. That's why I'm not using a service like this, is because I want to be able to have thousands of people on my list and not pay hundreds of dollars a month. Yeah. And then I haven't talked about that at all. I don't think it's a viable option because you have to deal with all this IP reputation stuff. And you'd have to set up all the mail server tools and everything else. That alone is just a headache. Like there is that thing, is it called MailCow? Yeah. This will help you set up an email server, but again, you have to deal with all the IP reputation stuff, and now you're managing a Linux server that actually does the email sending. It is a pretty big jump, isn't it? I don't know. And then there are other... I only know Mailchimp because I've heard it talked about on podcasts. There's lots of other mailing list services you could use. Top 9 mailing services. No, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, and I've been looking into Proton Mail, because that's the other aspect of this whole thing. So, like, I'm doing this mail stuff for my mailing list, but also really just looking into how I would self-host my own email if I wanted to. Yeah. I've never heard of Cindy. Newsletters, 100... Oh, I did! I think the one reason I didn't use them is because they weren't open source. Like... technically I think you can use it for free-ish, but it actually is closed source. I don't know. I looked into it. I did a bunch of research and then I didn't keep track of. Yeah, so you pay a one-time fee to get the software, $69, which isn't horrible. Yeah. I guess I'm done talking about this now. But yeah, that's my knowledge dump of all the email stuff that I've learned recently. Okay, we were talking about this. These were some interesting links that were posted on Best of JS. First one is things every programmer should know. I feel like if you're just bored at work sometime this week, this might be a good list to peruse through, but it is a lot. There's a lot of different sections, so it's kind of probably hard to parse, but it's a lot of stuff. This one I've talked about before, and if you're preparing for interviews and that kind of thing, this is great. If you know that your interview is going to be in JavaScript and you're trying to get a JavaScript job and you need to do algorithm type stuff, this repo has literally every data structure and algorithm that you could think of with test suites, and you can try implementing it yourself, and you can also see example implementations. But let's just look at the source. Like if you go in here, data structures, let's say we want to implement a linked list. We have tests. So you could basically just try to write your own based on these pre-written tests. And they have that for every single data structure and a bunch of different algorithms. So this repo is awesome if you're preparing for algorithm style interviews. This one is interesting, clean code JavaScript, because it takes a lot of the clean code concepts that came from like Uncle Bob and some of the other like clean code books, and it shows you examples with With JavaScript. Yeah, and that's a good call out. Yeah, the Primogen did a course recently that got released completely for free. So he streamed it on Twitch while he was doing it, but then Front End Masters released it for free. And I do believe he's using TypeScript and JavaScript for all of these as well. So you can see the Primogen implement those things and talk about them and such. So that's a good resource as well. Thanks for saying that. Okay. What else? This, yeah, so you can see this repo is cool because like if you're newer to the idea of like clean code, this has a lot of examples. So this talks about meaningful variable names. So when you're defining a variable, instead of doing something like this, give it a meaningful name. That's just one rule that you can follow in your code base to get things a little bit cleaner. Use the same vocabulary for the same type of variable. So instead of get user info, get client data, get customer record, get user. So this just has a bunch of examples like that you could follow to make sure that your code base is fairly clean. And then I found this one recently, the Tech Interview Handbook. It seems pretty awesome. It just has so much. So it talks about different types of interviews, different things that you can prepare for and stuff. Like there's just so many resources on this website, which is fed in from that GitHub repo. This thing looks awesome and is available for free. So if you're preparing for interviews, seems like another good thing as well. Yeah, you're right, Yanni, and welcome in, Yanni. Mailchimp Alternatives. We're back on that, but there are other ones you could use. Let's see. Moosend, HubSpot, OmniSend. All of their pricing doesn't look crazy, but the issue is once you get to 10,000 users, it's going to be a lot more than the price that you see listed there. So, yeah. Cool. ConvertKit? Is that another email thing? Yeah, no worries, Yanni. I'm doing good. I'm glad to see you in the chat. Appreciate you. And yeah, no worries. You stay busy. Stay busy out there. Oh, creator marketing for your book, your podcast, your newsletter. Interesting. Pricing. For up to 300 subscribers. I guess it's 0 if you don't want all of the extra features, but you can only have up to 300. So if I have more than 300 subscribers, how much do I pay? Don't know. But that's my main issue is like I'm already at 450 and it's only going to go up from there, so yeah. All right. I'm not going to worry about the price. I think I saw the slider. I'm not going to worry about the pricing. Let's take a quick scroll of trending GitHub repos, and then we've got about an hour and a half left. So we'll dive into some of these articles, and if anybody else has other suggestions, we'll look at those as well. I think the one thing I will try to talk about is databases. We didn't laugh at Uber. Yeah, we will. We're going to talk about that. But I want to look here. These are trending GitHub repos I can do from the past week. Welcome in, Arpajan. Glad to have you. Stable Diffusion Web UI. It's gotten 1,000 stars this week. Yeah, I heard. Yeah, that was news like a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of meta. We're talking about news. They're gonna deprecate this page, which is unfortunate. I mean, I'll result to using something like Best of JS or something like that, but there needs to be a more general Best of JS, like Best of GitHub, something like that. So yeah, this repo, they're using Stable Diffusion, so that's the technology behind like Dolly and Midjourney and stuff like that. But they let you do it just from a web API, which is pretty cool. Look at that, CyrilDB is trending. We'll talk about that next. Fireship, I think, did a video on Pocketbase. Or did he do a video on Cyril? He did a video on something recently about databases. Beautiful charts for iOS. Cool. Cool. He did it on Surreal? Okay. All algorithms implemented with Python. Nice. Yeah, so we mostly talk about JavaScript on this stream, but this is the same thing as that algorithms repo, but in Python instead of JavaScript. So definitely check that out. Check that out. Cool. I think we have plenty to talk about, so let's just do it. So, Dev or Die, I don't know if you're still here, but they asked the question, what are my thoughts on SurrealDB and EdgeDB and the current state of databases in general? So this is pretty relevant because we started talking about serverless functions earlier. And if you remember, these serverless functions are not running 24/7. So they need to spin up whenever they're in use, and then they spin back down immediately after or with some kind of timeout. Nice, Dev or Die. Okay, so we're talking about that now. And then I also talked about, like, if you're scaling in this way, let's say you have an influx of like 10,000 requests because your website got shared on Reddit or something like that. If you're using one of these backend providers, they could potentially spin up multiple instances of that serverless function so that it can handle the load of that influx of traffic. But if they spin up, let's say, 100 instances of your little function, and every single one of those instances needs to connect to a database, if it's all connecting to the same database, now you have a bottleneck. So even though your application code has scaled up, and Danger Mouse, thank you for that Prime sub. So your application scales up, but now every single instance of that scaled up application is trying to talk to the same database. I'm going to draw a really rudimentary, horrible diagram. But think about it like this. All right, so your server, each one of these little boxes is an instance of your serverless function. Boom. And so all of a sudden, your site starts getting thousands and thousands of requests. So they spin up a bunch of these, right? So a bunch of these are spun up, and each one of these is serving like a certain portion of your incoming requests. But they all need to talk to the database. And if you only have one database entry point, so the incoming requests to your server have scaled out, right? Because all of the incoming requests are going to get distributed here. But now each one of these things, it has to make a call or request to your database. And that will slow things down because you've handled all of these incoming requests, but now how do you handle the fact that they're all talking to the same database? Well, you could scale it out in the same way, right? So instead of having only one database instance, now you have multiple database instances. And so, and so this would be an example of horizontal scaling. So essentially, you wrote your code, you wrote your one little function, right? And honestly, let me just show you an example of what a serverless function would look like, because it's pretty easy to do with Vercel. Let's look at the docs really quick. And for example, I just want a nice little Node.js serverless function. How am I going to do that? I have Next. I guess technically I could show it with Next, because Next has that little API folder. Let's do it. We're going to spin up a little Next app, and I'll show you the API folder. Is that literally... Do I literally just need an API folder, and then I can deploy to Vercel? I guess, but I need to find... why is it so hard to find? I want developer documentation on how to define a function. Okay. Functions. Serverless functions. This is what I want. But it's not, I don't want Next though. Node.js. But then that doesn't give me TypeScript. Is that where I'm at right now? Wait, am I just clicking the same thing? I believe there's a way to do this with TypeScript too, but let's spin it up. At Versal node. Okay, so I probably need to install that as a deb dependency. At Versal. First of all, create a package.json. So generate a package.json. Great. The only dependency I should need is Versal/node, because that's going to give me my types. And then inside of here, I can define a folder called API. Now, inside this folder, there are going to be my little functions. So I'm going to have one called add.js. So this will take in a body that has 2 numbers and then returns the sum of them. And Oscar has some TypeScript code for us. And actually, I should call it add.ts so we can do nice TypeScript stuff. Cool. So you export a function that takes in a request and a response. Request is of type Versal request. And response is of type Versal response. Configuring your project. Routes. API routes. This is what I wanted. Cool, thank you. I could have copied from there. Cool. So if we look at request.body is what? I believe that's going to be a string. It says it's an any type. Let's just log the request body because we might have to manually parse it as JSON. Like if we're sending an incoming request, and then we'll just send back a body that has an answer property with the value 42. Cool. And then I should be able to do Versal dev. Yes. Under my personal account, not a new project. That's the project name. And by the way, I have to have Versal installed globally to be able to run this. And I've already done Versal login and all of that good stuff. Yeah. I'm going to keep the default settings. Cool. So it spun up my app. I should be able to go to /API/add, and then it responds with an object that has a body with the value 42. Actually, I don't want that. I want that. Like that. Awesome. And if we look at the incoming request, request.body is undefined because we did a GET request. I should use what? Virtual bash? Oh, is this just like completion? What? You can run an actual bash function as a serverless function? Okay, I don't want to do that. I don't think I want to do that anyways. All right, let's try making a post request here. And I think the other thing we could do is say, like, if request dot, is there a method? Yeah, so if request dot method is not post, we need to respond with like, that's not supported. So this is the other thing about serverless functions that you may not be used to, is like when you're building something with like Express, you explicitly define, when we get a post request here, do this. If we get a GET request here, do that. With the serverless function, all you have is the incoming request and the incoming response. There really is no built-in routing. Like there's a way to have there's a way to do routing within the function. Like you can use a library for that, but without it, you just have to kind of do it manually. So right here, I could say, if this is not a post request, then I'm going to send just a 404 back that says not found. Otherwise, if it was a post request, we're actually going to use that request body. So now if I request this from the browser, internal server error. I need to return. So right now, I tried to respond, and then I tried to respond again. I need to do an early return so the code down here doesn't get reached. There we go. It says not found because I made a GET request. And so now, if I want to make a post request, I'll use something like Insomnia. New HTTP request. Post request. Here we go. So I'm going to make a post request to my little serverless function here, and I'm going to send it a JSON body that has param1 40, param2 2. So I'm going to send it this object that has these two properties, and I want it to add it together. It said 42, but it didn't actually do the math. Right now, I want to see what request body is. So I want to see what do we get access to when we send a body like this. And apparently, they have some automatic parsing. So I'm glad to see that, because when I log the body here, I'm getting an actual JSON object. So now I can use it. So I could say request.body.param1 plus request.body.param2. And then I probably would also need some validation to say, like, at this point, you would use a library like Zod, but I could say if request.body.param1, if it doesn't have that. So if object.hasOwn, can I do this? Request.body, I'm looking for that param1 property. Try changing the lib. Yeah, this should work. I think, because I think we have access to this. Maybe not, though. I'm using Node 16 right now. Yeah, Insomnia is great. There's also Postman. There's a few other options, but Insomnia is the one that I've been using. I guess we could just do it the old way. Object.prototype.hasOwnProperty. We're going to call that, whether this argument is request.body, and the argument we care about is param1. So if we don't have this property, we're going to return what's the status code if the body is not, or if you receive an invalid body on the back end? $400? All right, we'll do a 400. So that says missing param1, and I need to return here unprocessable entity. Yeah, what's the status code for unprocessable entity? And then if we don't have param2, we can say missing param2. It's 422? All right, we're going to go with status code 422. I've had my caffeine today, so I'm not going to fall for the 418 status code. Okay, so if it's not a post request, not found. If we're missing param1, send back an error. If we're missing param2, send back an error. If we have both param1 and param2, add them together. I guess technically at this point we would also want to do another check. I don't want to be writing all of this validation code. Like, you would use a library at this point. You wouldn't do this manually. But I would also want to say if it doesn't have that property, or if number.isNan. Or I think I just do isNan. Request.body.param1. So if param1 is not a number, param2. Cool. So I've added that. And then if I try to send banana as param1, it should say invalid param1. Great. But if I send that as 10 and param2 as banana, it should say invalid param2. Great. But if I send 10 and 10, it should give me back 20 because it should add those two together. Great. We've built a little serverless function. Now, of course, this is dumb. You would want a validation library. You would want to do more useful things, and you would probably also have a library that would allow you to directly handle if it's a GET request or a POST request. And you probably also want to like set headers and stuff like that. But this is a function. You cannot deny me that fact. This is a function. And when we deploy this to Vercel, we are basically putting that function onto some server somewhere, or we're giving it to the service Vercel, and then when a request comes in to that backend, Vercel will spin up an instance, respond to that request, and then spin back down. Obviously you could just do addition on the client side, but what if this was some complex mathematical operation? A good job, Coding Garden fan. That's good job. Okay, and so now if I want to deploy this, I can just say Vercel. That will look at my code. It's going to see this API folder, and it's going to see, we're going to have a little serverless function called add. It's going to build it, and then I'm going to get a deployed endpoint. And actually, I'll go ahead and log in. So you can see that it deployed it here. The root is not found, but if I go to add, it should say... or API/add, I should get that not found response. Great. But now if I send my post request here to this deployed serverless function, that actually went to some remote server somewhere. I'm going to log into my Vercel dashboard. And yeah, I think on the Vercel dashboard, I should be able to see stats as to like how long it takes to spin up or if it's currently spun up, that kind of thing. A practical use would actually be to define an API like this, right? So like a literal, think about how you might define like an Express app or something like that. You would just do that this way. And there are, like I said, there are libraries and frameworks that make it easier to do like routing, so you could define different routes and stuff like that. I'm logging in. Give me just a second. Yeah, exactly. So now anytime we need to add two numbers together, we can just you can call my function. I want to give you a curl command. Can I copy this as curl inside of generate client code? Curl. Nice. I'll put this in a gist really quick. So if you copy and paste this in your command line, you will make a request, or you could use Insomnia, use whatever you want, but make a request to my backend, and we'll see those logs come up here. Limemode says, I was hoping if I followed Coding Garden long enough, we would eventually get this functionality implemented. Cool, so somebody called the function. It ran. Well, other people called it too. Can we show the details? So So we can see that it's taking about 3 milliseconds for some of these. If we look at the first, what's the first one that ran? 2259. So if we look at this one, the first one that ran only took 3.1 milliseconds. So no, there's no, I don't believe there's no IP addresses here. This is I mean, unless these are IPv6 addresses. This is just a request ID. That's not a it's not a thing. I don't even know why we wrote that. I guess we were talking about this diagram. It's not IPv6? Okay. So the old way would be I deploy to a server, I have this running, and then every single request that comes into my app would go to that one node. But now this is horizontal scaling because I've basically taken my little add function here, and if I'm getting a bunch of requests, it's actually going to spin up multiple instances, and now I've scaled horizontally. And I can do this with this specific app because there's no state here. Like this code has been written in a way that it can kind of like run standalone. 49 plus true is 70 or 50. I feel like I would have caught that. Like this is nan I thought was working. Did you just get infinity? People are sending random stuff to the backend. That's fine. That's totally fine. So yeah, that's horizontal scaling. Basically, instead of having one, you have multiple, and now they can all handle it in unison. The thing that I'm not mentioning, though, is that there is definitely also essentially an entry point, and this is known as a load balancer. I don't know what they call it on Vercel, and on Vercel it's completely transparent to me. You could also call this like an API gateway, but the load balancer receives the incoming request and then decides where to send that request. And it also could potentially decide if it needs to spin up a new instance. And so everyone that's making a request to my app is hitting this specific endpoint, serverless-example.eosn.versalapp.app. So everyone making the request first has to go through this entry point that then decides, oh, do I already have an instance spin up? If I do, like, send the request there. Oh, am I getting too many requests? Let's spin up another one and send the request there. So everyone is first hitting this. And anybody that's knows more about this stuff in the chat, is there another name for this in the serverless world, or is it just a load balancer? Like, what would we call, like, what essentially Vercel is doing here? I think this also is potentially an API gateway, but you probably could have a load balancer that sits in front of an API gateway as well. So API gateway is a concept from AWS. Because with AWS Lambda, you can create a bunch of Lambda functions, but then, like, if every single function I wrote was deployed at a different URL, that gets really, really cumbersome when you're building a client to talk to that API. So an API gateway sits in front and appears like a single API with a bunch of endpoints, but it in turn is calling other serverless functions. The thing about deploying with Vercel is the way that you do that is just with more files. So every serverless function you want to have, you create another file. Create to do. Get to dos. Delete to do. Something like, I mean, you probably could combine this into a single handler called to do, but basically, oh yeah, and if we're talking about math specifically, now we have a different file for all of the different type of operations that we want to perform. And each one of these, we would define a separate handler. It would have its own individual logic. And when the requests are happening, each one of those actually could scale horizontally. And like that's another benefit of an architecture like this is, let's say your add function is super popular, right? Thousands of people are trying to add numbers together. Well, you can individually scale that one horizontally. Like we spin up 10 instances of add, whereas these other ones are not as popular because people aren't creating and deleting to-dos as much. So we only spin up 1 or 2 instances when they're actually needed. And so that kind of gets into the benefit of like why you scale or why you architect this way is so that you can handle scaling in this way. But yeah, and so your incoming requests, like basically, and this is like another thing that Vercel does for you, is it creates that gateway into these functions. Because if I were to deploy this, now we would have a bunch of different endpoints like API/get to do, API/create to do, but it all would be to this same entry point. So all to this same load balancer or gateway. And then when the request comes in, it knows where to send that specific request. Cool. All of that to say, we were talking about databases and the fact that if I have all of these things scaling horizontally and now they all need to talk to the same database, I've almost lost the benefit of scaling up so much because now this is a bottleneck, right? Because if my database queries are really slow, then even though I've scaled up a bunch of instances, they're all waiting on that database query to complete. And that's where I run into an issue and why it becomes trickier to just have a single database instance, especially if you have hundreds and hundreds of Lambda functions all trying to access this database, each one in turn potentially creating a new database connection. And with most databases, you're capped at like 20, 30 concurrent connections. It depends on where it's hosted in your database settings. But databases typically cannot have thousands and thousands of read-write connections to them. That's where you need a serverless database or an edge database. Yeah, and I think I will mention the fact that most projects don't hit that problem, and what was I gonna say? Lost my train of thought. We will pause. We will. What do I even want to say here? Yeah, and I guess so that gets into the idea of vertical scaling, and Asset Spark mentions it. So like let's say. So we've talked about like if you're doing it with serverless and like how you would spin up this way. The thing is, this also doesn't have to be serverless. Like technically, you can scale horizontally. You could scale an entire server horizontally. So like if each one of these little boxes represented a Linux server running Nginx and running your Node.js Express API, you could also scale that horizontally. Like you could have a bunch of instances of it running with a load balancer pointed and distributing the traffic. This doesn't have to be Lambda functions. That is just, it's similar, but instead of scaling an entire server, you're scaling an individual function. And this is horizontal scaling. Vertical scaling is you just create a bigger, beefier machine. So instead of creating multiple instances of this, you just create one really big instance. You create just a big boy. They've got terabytes of RAM. They can handle 100,000 connections, but this one big server. How do I increase the font size? Format. There we go. It's a big old server. And so you would call this vertical scaling because basically you just you have one really big server. It has tons of RAM. It can handle tons, but it is it's horizontal. I mean, we could do it this way. Now you could think of it like it's vertical. And this is another way to handle it. And the idea here is like the way that you write your code changes depending on how you're going to deploy it, right? So if you wrote your code with Express and there is no way to take an Express app and turn it into serverless functions, there actually is. There's a serverless builder that can basically look at an Express app that has a bunch of different routes and create either a single handler or a bunch of different serverless handlers to handle that. But regardless, let's say that didn't exist and you wrote your Express up that way and there's no way to scale it up using serverless functions. And maybe you've also written it with a bunch of like session handling and state internally, where if you were to create a separate instance, that would create issues with multiple users potentially not getting served the right request because one of these instances didn't know about their session. That's when you would just do this. A big old server, a bunch of RAM, bunch of bandwidth, and it just handles everything. But this potentially does cost a lot more because you're paying for that bigger server. And that also gets into the trade-offs of like why you would do something like, or why you would architect for serverless instead of like a big old server, is because these serverless functions spin up when you need them. They're not running all the time. With this big old server, it needs to run 24/7. So you're paying for that server every single day of every single week of every single month of the entire year to keep that server running, even if, like, let's say at night you're not getting as many requests because your users are based in the US and they only use your app at a certain time. And so, yeah, this is vertical scaling. And then it potentially would still just talk to one database, but then you also could vertically scale your database. I think it's so funny that we're actually doing it vertically. Meaning you just have a big old database server that can handle a bunch of connections. But yeah, that like all of this gets into system design and like why you would in trade-offs of one over the other. Because okay, so let's say your big server goes down. Your entire app has gone down, right? Because this one thing was serving everyone, and all of a sudden it crashed for some reason. Now your entire app is down, and so that's why you would actually have like a potential backup. What's the better terminology here? You have your there's old terminology that we shouldn't really use anymore. Primary, secondary. I like that. And a fallover. Yeah. So this is your big server fallback. Yeah. I like this. Fallback or standby. Replica. Yeah, but the idea here though is like you also would have just like a tiny load balancer. And with an architecture like this, basically it would always send requests here to the big server, unless if the big server goes down, it's like, oh, we're gonna redirect traffic here. While we figure out what's going on over here. But with this architecture, basically this thing it's the primary server. It's always serving unless there's something and that goes wrong, and then you would fall back to the replica. Yeah. So this is the old terminology, and we don't use it anymore because it's outdated and it's not inclusive, and it's from a different time. I like the idea of like main and then fallback, or like a replica. That's better, or failover. That's better terminology to use. And it technically is a mirror. Like it is an exact copy of this other big server. It's just standing by in case anything goes wrong. And I don't want to. I missed a lot of. I missed a lot of things that the Shebots was saying, but the Shebots does this for a living. So they. Their title is Development Security Operations, and so like they handle deployments in servers and stuff like that. And I kind of agree with this, like, and that's interesting. That's why like things like Versal are kind of amazing. Like, I know I'm talking about all this scaling stuff, but like for you as a beginner, literally all you have to do is write this function, you deploy it to Versal. All of this other stuff is handled for you. You don't even have to think about it. And that's just like the benefits of being a developer nowadays, is because so many of these platform as a services and stuff have been created so that we don't have to think about all the details. So yeah. Yeah, and then you follow a similar idea when you're talking about databases as well, because, all right, well, what if this database goes down? All right, well, we'll have a backup. But this database needs to be kept in sync, this backup, because all of our requests are being served from this main one. But if this main one goes down, we're going to divert to this one. But this one needs to stay in sync. So any operations happening on this one are being replicated or copied over to this one. So in the event that this one needs to shut down, we can just transfer all traffic to that one. But yeah, check the stats of the server. Did somebody are you firing an HTTP tool at it? So the fun part about this is, like, I'm on the open source plan, and I'm not actually being charged for any of these requests. So even though, like, a bunch, like, tons and tons of requests are coming in, I actually don't have to pay for it, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, we can see tons of requests are coming in. Like, you see the timestamp changing here. Somebody has written a tool or spun up a tool that's just firing requests off to this thing. But you can see that even with all of these requests coming in, look at the response time. Like, it is staying under 2 milliseconds. Like, that's typically, if I had like even if I went to the scenario where I had this big old server, at some point, it's not going to be able to handle all of the incoming requests, especially if somebody's trying to denial of service it. Whereas in this case, I don't ever run into a denial of service. I just get a bigger bill at the end of the month because it spun up a bunch. Yeah, and I think that's the other thing. Like, I'm covering these topics like at a very high level. It's certain people's entire jobs is to do this kind of thing. And there are a lot of trade-offs and decisions that you make in, like, how you're architecting stuff. I think I saw someone ask, how do you learn about system design? I learned by experience, and also just by trying. Like, I knew that I had to deploy a thing with a fallback, or I knew that I had to deploy a thing with some kind of load balancer. And so I just learned it. I learned about AWS EC2 and EC2 load balancer, and AWS RDS. Like, a lot of this stuff you can just do by learning all of the tools inside of AWS, because they're infrastructure as a service. And so they allow you to very easily kind of like spin these things up. Before that existed, you kind of just had to spin up a Linux server and install some software. But yeah, I learned this stuff just by experience. And you can probably tell the way that I'm talking about it. Like, I'm not an expert. I know it at a high level, and I know how to use a lot of these tools that kind of like do the hard work for me. But you could watch 100 systems design courses and still not learn as much as just literally trying to spin up a load balancer and get it working. So yeah, I just learned by doing. Okay, even more requests are coming. I'm just gonna kill the function, but you can see that, like, even with all of these requests coming in, my response time is still under 2 milliseconds. Like, you would not be able to do that with a big server. At a certain point, it would just freeze up. It would be so run down with so many requests that it couldn't handle it. All right, this deployment's gonna go away now. Delete. Great. So whoever was running that tool should be getting some errors now, because I deleted the entire thing. And so this is the other interesting thing about Vercel, is you can actually hook it up to a GitHub repo. Then it gets even easier, right? So you make a code change, push it up to GitHub, it automatically deploys, it automatically scales. Like, it's never been easier to write really, really scalable applications. Yeah. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing, is, like, I'm saying big server. Technically, this could actually just be a really big virtual machine. It doesn't have to be a physical server. But that's a whole nother concept, like a whole nother thing that you would think about. Would the big server be more secure than serverless? Security would be a separate concept. Like, security would have to do with like access to the server, and I would argue that this is potentially less secure, because you need a dedicated person that installs patches on the server, that makes sure and like looks at the request logs and makes sure that no one is trying to hack it or get into it. They keep it updated, and that's a lot of work to do. Like, if you do it the serverless way, you don't even have to think about the hardware or even the operating system that your functions are running on. The provider, whether it's Versal or AWS or any of the others, they handle all of that for you. Like, you don't even have to think about like, is it running Ubuntu Linux? Is it running Fedora? Doesn't matter. Here's a function, please run it for me. Whereas if you're in charge of this big server, you need to hire somebody that can manage the server, that can configure it, keep it updated, all of that good stuff. And that's just like one aspect of security. You also have to have good coding standards and good security practices there, because if the code is bad, then it's not going to be secure. Like, if you didn't write it in a way that was validating it correctly, and was just like putting junk into a database, then you have a security issue there. So security happens in a lot of different places. Yeah. And then, so sharding, I don't think the two servers here would be sharding, and maybe you're referring to the databases, but I believe even this isn't sharding yet. So this database replica is an exact copy of this database. All of the data, everything inside of it, it's an exact copy. Sharding is where you now have multiple database instances, but you've structured your schema in a way that certain data will go to one instance and certain data will go to another instance. So you've basically separated out your data based on how it's used and how often it gets requested, because there might be some nodes in the sharding that don't receive requests as often because it's more for like long-term storage, and then there might be some shards where that get lots and reads and writes for certain types of data in your app, and you would essentially partition by like user location, which usually makes the most sense, especially if you're like have a global app. But you could also partition by like user ID. So the first 10 users that sign up are in this partition, but the next 10 are in that partition, that kind of thing. But it gets complicated. I will. This is my zone of ignorance, which I'm about to talk about. These are the things that I know less and less about. The CJ zone of ignorance. Anything below this line. It's like, I've done some basic stuff. So like I've deployed with Amazon RDS, for Relational Database Service, and I've had a replica backup. I've done that. Easy enough. I've had just like individual databases that serverless functions talk to. This is the piece that I don't have experience scaling. And I haven't really needed to, which we'll talk about in a second. I'm going to catch up on chat, and then I'll talk about why this is my zone of ignorance and why the apps I've built, I haven't necessarily had to worry about all of that stuff. Yeah. We have a full team of site reliability engineers that is responsible for managing our infrastructure, among other things. Yeah, so entire teams keeping track of the servers, the serverless functions, all that good stuff. Yeah. So I'm showing an example with Versal. Netlify, same thing. You literally have an API folder with a bunch of functions, and you can do this similar thing. I believe the request and the response objects might be slightly different, though they might just be based off of Node.js. So you'd have to import some different types, but the code would probably look almost exactly the same. Same thing with Firebase Functions. You have an API folder, put your stuff in, or I think you have like a functions folder, put your stuff in there, it gets deployed. There's also this thing called the serverless framework. I haven't used it, but I know some people that have, and they used it especially when they were deploying directly to AWS Lambda, because the fact that Versal basically wraps all of this in a nice little API gateway for you, and you don't even have to worry about the implementation details, is kind of amazing. With something like serverless, you have a bunch of configuration files, so that when you deploy to AWS, you basically tell it that all of these functions should live together under the same API gateway, and they all should use the same authenticator and different stuff like that. So the serverless framework helps with managing all of that configuration. But if you're using something like Versal or Netlify Functions or Firebase Functions, it handles all of that for you. You don't need as much stuff. Yeah. Oh, you technically, if you're scaling, you could have an instance that is only used for reads, and that would happen. That could be scaled in a way where if it's getting most of the requests that are reads, it handles all of that, and then any of the writes go to another database, and then those are replicated back onto the read-only instance. Yeah. No, I would not say systems design is expected. You might get some systems design questions, but they're not going to expect you to know a lot of stuff. And let's say you're graduating with a computer science degree. It's good to know about this stuff. You definitely can watch some YouTube videos on people talking about system design, and you can read into it. You can read into horizontal scaling and vertical scaling and all of that stuff. But like I said earlier, like the only way you're really going to know enough about it is if you've actually done it, if you've actually had the experience doing it. Yeah. Yeah, and it used to be that, like, this was a separate job that required, people this was the only thing that they did. These days, because of platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, you have developers that are kind of like crossing the line, like they're writing application code and they're writing configurations to be able to deploy automatically and stuff like that. But, yeah. All right, I am way behind on chat. I'm going to do a quick scroll. Yeah, once you get thrown into situations on the job, you have no choice but to learn. Yeah. Having a denial, yeah, that's exactly what I did. I was getting denial of service, and I was like, I'll just delete it. Yeah, you don't get to make a request there anymore. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and then so I will say I've never read a book on system design. I've never watched. I mean, I watched some system design interview videos when I was searching for a job a few years back, but everything I know I just learned by doing. Yes, that's a good clarification. Sharding with a D is not sharting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what we were talking about with the big old server. Like, this is how we scale. We just buy a bigger server, and then that is how we have scaled up. And for some apps, that's a viable option, especially if you have the money to do it. That's a viable option. Yeah, and I also, like, I have not talked about containers, Kubernetes, virtualization. All of that is just a bunch of other stuff that does similar stuff. Yeah, and I talked about this earlier. So, serverless, it's a buzzword, but really all it means is that it is a server that is not running 24/7. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that you don't have a server. It means it's not running 24/7. It spins up on demand, and you only get charged for when it was running, or when it ran. That is serverless. There are still servers involved, but typically with a lot of these frameworks, that's also transparent to you. Like, when I deployed to Versal just now, I have no idea if that was a Linux server or a Windows server, or if it was running Ubuntu, or if it was running something else. Like, I have no idea, and I don't care. Basically, I just said, hey, Versal, please run this function for me. They handle everything. They handle spinning up that server. They handle spinning it down. That's the main, like, one of the main benefits. Yeah, you could find out what it is using, like what's the OS and stuff like that, but you don't need to. You don't need to. Is this something a DevOps would work on, or is it specifically a site reliability engineer? So I see, like, site reliability engineers and DevOps, it's like there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of things that one might do that the other might do as well. I think I don't know the specifically. I think like a site reliability engineer, when I hear the term, it makes me think, oh, they're like in a data center. But these days, probably not. They're probably still doing. I don't know. You tell me, chat. Is anybody here a site reliability engineer? And what is your relationship with DevOps? Yeah. Yeah. What programming language would you recommend for someone that is working as a network engineer and wants to create scripts for network devices? Oh, I think that depends on the devices that you're working with, because like certain devices will support certain languages or protocols or certain configurations. I would say, like, as a network engineer, you should start looking into just DevOps generally, because you'll start to learn about some of the languages used for configuration, like YAML and JSON and stuff like that. But then you also have like scripting languages that you can use to automate tasks, and that's why people are mentioning like PowerShell or Bash. The thing is, like, I use JavaScript and Node.js so much that I could technically write a lot of those scripts with Node.js instead of using something like Bash. But I would say, like, as a network engineer, you're probably closer to Linux, and so, like, Bash probably makes the most sense. But if you want... So Bash is a scripting language. Python is a programming language. You can do scripting type stuff. Just like Node.js, you can do scripting like type stuff. So technically, you could use Python to do it as well. And by learning Python to do it, you're also learning other skills that eventually could be used for like actual application development. So, yeah. Oh yeah, we talked about ZX before. That thing is cool. Yeah, and I think I need to talk about this next, and which is why I have this zone of ignorance. It's just like I've never had to actually worry about. Oh, that's a job listing that says what they need to do. But yeah, I think some people were saying, I'd say they are the same thing for the most part in terms of SREs and DevOps. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So all of that to get to the point where we're trying to answer this question for dev or die. So we talked about how we potentially scale servers or scale functions, but we haven't talked about the database area. Like I'm saying, this is my zone of ignorance. Because so I used to work at a software consultancy, and we would build applications for people that came to us and asked us to build them. So those could be startups, it could be large enterprises, it could be existing software companies that didn't have the bandwidth and like, oh, hey, we need this tool built. Can you please build it for us? And the majority of the apps that I built didn't have more than a few thousand users. They're typically used as like internal tools, or they were very niche products. Like not everything is Twitter scale. Not everything is Facebook or Google scale, right? Not everything is going to have millions, if not billions of users. And so all of the apps that I've worked on haven't had more than a few thousand users. And in that scenario, you don't have to worry as much about getting a huge influx of traffic, or you don't have to worry about as much as your database queries being slow, because most relational database management systems like Postgres or MySQL were built to manage potentially thousands of users, not thousands of concurrent connections, but thousands of users, because typically the connections to the database are happening from your API server or your backend server. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like even if you're up to like 10,000 users, you don't even have to worry about scaling horizontally. Like you could have I was going to use EC2's terms. So like there's the AWS EC2 has like the T2 micro instance. You can look at their various instance sizes. Regardless, the T2 micro has like 1 or 2 CPUs and like 1 or 2 gigs of RAM. It's a tiny little computer, but I had apps that would serve thousands of users on that one little instance. That's all I needed. I didn't need to split it out into serverless functions. I didn't need a big old server. That one little Linux server could handle it. And spinning up Amazon RDS or relational database system was enough to handle it as well. So the little server that could, yeah. Yeah. Backend as a service is becoming more popular. Yeah, and so I haven't even talked about that. So basically, we talked about scaling in this way. We're starting to get into like, well, okay, well, how do you scale your database if you need to? And you especially run into needing to scale your database if you structure your app this way, right? Because potentially you'll have so many different serverless functions that are all trying to access the database at the same time. But what we haven't talked about are things like Firebase real-time. And so this is a back-end as a service. And it does all of the scaling for you. I mean, you're going to pay for it, but it does the scaling for you. You just write your code to run against this database, and you potentially don't even need back-end code. All of this could be running on your client side. But they handle the scaling up and all that stuff for you, and there are other services like it. Yeah. Yeah, so this VOD will always be here. At least it'll be here for the next 60 days. Twitch, Coding Garden, videos, archive. If you go here, you can see every recent stream from the past 60 days. That's here. And then I also have an archive YouTube channel. All of the streams get posted there within a few days. So definitely check that out too. Yeah. Not every app is used by millions of users, but what about an app is used by a huge amount of people? What would you suggest? And that's what we're about to get into. And that's where we reach my zone of ignorance. Like, I have not scaled up like that. I don't have the experience doing it. I've only built apps that will work for a few thousand users. And for the majority of the apps in the world, for the majority of the people that are sitting here in this chat right now that are engineers or developers, that's probably all they care about. I mean, let's put it in the chat really quick. Like, how many active users does the product or the app that you're working on have? And I guess we probably could do a poll too. It'll be fun to just see some numbers scroll in the chat. Yeah. 100,000. Roughly 80. See? Like, 100,000? Wow. Okay. 50,000? 0. 10,000 to 50,000. 90 million. 200,000. Few million? Some of you might work at like really big product companies too. Yeah. 200, 300, 8 billion. 50,000. Yeah, and one computer guy is saying, Postgres is quite robust. We have a client with more than 500,000 users, and we only have one database server for it. I assume you probably have backups, but what you're saying is like you haven't horizontally scaled it. You haven't sharded it or anything like that. 5 users, but you still need the cloud to run it. 10,000. Jeez, 250 million an hour. What's up, Mittens the Killer Bunny? Yeah, like I would say it's either you have millions of users or you have under 10,000 users. That's about what the chat is saying right now. Tens of users. But I guess all I'm saying is, like, I have over 10 years of experience. Like, I am a very competent developer and a somewhat competent application architect, and I have not worked on apps that have more than a few thousand users. So that's just me and my experience. And I think like a lot of people that have that experience of millions or thousands of users, they probably worked at one of the FANG companies, right? Or work there now. And even then, you're probably on some smaller team that doesn't like even see the bigger picture. You're just like handling the scale for like a smaller piece of that entire app. But yeah. Yeah, cool. Thank you everyone for putting numbers in the chat. We're the masters of our silo. Yeah. So I feel like I'm taking so long to talk about this, but this gets to the question asked by Dev or Die, which is, do I have any thoughts on SurrealDB or EdgeDB? Because in this age of things being serverless and things being able to scale like infinitely horizontally, now you have to start thinking about, well, how do I scale my database as well? And that's where these solutions come into play. So let's look into them really quick. So there was a SurrealDB, a scalable, distributed, collaborative document graph database for the real-time web. And then the other one that they mentioned was EdgeDB. I'm with Fang. I have a Facebook account. Oh, and then that's totally true. Networks, yeah. So if e-commerce is another huge industry, right? Really just running the e-commerce for a large corporation like Walmart. Like Walmart.com has Walmart Labs, and they I think that's still a thing, but they handle all of the back end operations and everything for for Walmart. There was a while back. It was a few years ago. There was a podcast. I think it was a Node podcast, but they brought on the Walmart Labs team, and they just talked about how they handle Black Friday traffic on Walmart.com. And it was fascinating to hear because that's the one of the days of the year where you're going to have millions of users all trying to use your site at the same time. And they talked about how they do that. Black Friday is game day, yeah. Yeah, and so Happy came out of the Walmart Labs. They created this. They created a bunch of other stuff too. Yeah. Yeah, and so talking about Amazon Prime Day and all of that, it's fun to read about, especially like if you're not in that industry, just hearing what you have to do and stuff like that. Okay, so there's SurrealDB, EdgeDB. There's also PlanetScale, which I've heard a lot of people talking about, but I know nothing about. In the chat, can you just throw in what are some other newer database technologies that have come out in the age of serverless and instantly scaling and stuff like that? Fauna, I've definitely heard of Fauna. Supabase AppWrite. Never heard of it. Can you really create a dev product without describing it in at least 10 words? Scalable, serverless, bleeding edge, super cool, managed open source red solution to your database. I mean, I think it's a current trend, like this thing. I don't know. Look at the free plan of... We're going to look at all of them. Like, here's the interesting thing, right? Of all of the apps I've worked on, most of them actually fit into the free and hobby tier of a lot of these services, even though they are for legitimate businesses that are, like, making money, which is kind of crazy to think about. Preparation, projections, and then hoping. If for Black Friday, yeah. Yeah. Redshift? Wait, so look at FaunaDB. PlanetScale is just MySQL, but I thought it was MySQL that scaled. Yeah, the serverless database platform. And then we looked at PocketBase, but I thought PocketBase... open source backend for your next software as a service and mobile app in one file. But does it scale? That's really what we're looking at here, is like services that allow you to scale your database and are built for scaling up front. Because technically, like, a Postgres database can be scaled, but it takes some work. You have to know how to structure the schema, how to shard it, that kind of thing. And then you need a service to deploy it on. And that applies for any SQL database, MySQL or Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. All of them can be sharded. But all of these services that we're talking about now are basically, they're doing what serverless did for, like, infrastructure. They're doing that, but for databases, so that you don't have to think about the sharding aspect. I mean, maybe you do. We'll look into the docs. And I need to put some arrows here. Arrow down. Like this. Did that not work? Microsoft Access. Build what you dream. Never worry about your database again. Cool. AppWrite is like Firebase? Okay. Oh, they're two separate ones. I see. Yeah, I think Supabase, at the end of the day, it's just a Postgres database. So if you wanted to scale it, you would just scale it as you would a Postgres database. I guess there's other aspects of the Supabase ecosystem. Like, you have the Postgres REST API that's running on top of it, and so that probably would need to scale as well. But Yeah, I don't know if I'd put this in the same boat as all of these other ones because it's not specifically built for edge functions or for scaling with serverless functions. Yeah, so we pulled up Cockroach. Oh, they tweeted me. I don't know if anybody from Cockroach is watching right now, but they tweeted at me. They're like, hey, you should check this out. I have not looked into it at all. Neo4j is a graph database. Are they doing anything for like edge functions or serverless functions? Graph petabyte scale. Wow. Backend for Kubernetes. Yeah. What's up, Samit? Welcome in. Do you even scale, bro? No, I don't. I don't. So this is the interesting thing that I was seeing. Like there are people that are using SQLite as an edge database, which I have not wrapped my mind around yet. But it's basically because there's also something for like SQLite distributed. It's a thing that I saw recently. Yeah, DQLite. High availability SQLite. Like it sounds like an oxymoron because SQLite is a flat file database typically used it's like standalone. It doesn't scale, but something like this makes it so that you can basically take your SQLite database and distribute it so that each of your little edge functions, so think about it like this, like each of these functions that spin up has their own instance of this little SQLite database, and then any writes that they make to it then sync across all other instances. It's a thing. Google Spreadsheets I don't think would be for like scaling and stuff. Yeah. I mean, for small projects and personal projects, Google Sheets actually is really nice because you don't even need a database. You just have a spreadsheet and you put your data in there. Yeah. I doubt there will be a service that provides a scalable data. Keeping data up to date while trying to spin up a new one might be a nightmare. Yeah, but that's the problem that all of these things are solving. Never heard of Tinybird. Yeah. Wait, are you from Cockroach TV, Mittens the Killer Buddy? I think you did that whenever I was talking about Cockroach, right? Yeah. Yeah, I like coding on a Mac. So the reason that I like it is that all of the other stuff that I do works really well on a Mac. So I do music production, sometimes like image editing and video editing. All of that works really well on a Mac. I've done it on Linux, but it requires a lot of setup that I just don't feel like doing. So, okay, cool. Mitten says, nope. So yeah, that's why I like a Mac. I do a lot of other stuff. And if I wanted to build an iOS app, I could, because I'm on a Mac. Yeah. Though, things are getting better in the Linux world. They are. So I might eventually switch to Linux. Yeah, so we have a tab open for PlanetScale. We're going to try to talk about it. What kind of music do I produce? I guess music production is a loaded term. Because I make music on my laptop that nobody ever hears. But I have been streaming it recently. So I have this project called Probably Happening. We might be streaming tonight. Don't know. But basically I use Ableton Live for live performance. So I have an entire guitar stack inside of there, lots of like vocal effects, and then various software instruments. And then I use all of that for live improvisation. If you look at the clips, you can see some of the... you can have a taste of some of the kind of music that we make. But it's all of the stuff I'm doing with Probably Happening is completely improvised. But it's done inside of Ableton. Yeah. I make sounds on my laptop. EdgeDB? Is this a specific thing? Do we have a tab open for this right now? Oh, I guess we do. We do. It's over there. Yeah, thanks for the follow. We usually stream for a couple of hours, and then like everything we do, completely improvised. It's not rehearsed. The genres vary. Like sometimes it's rock, sometimes it's more like ambient, sometimes it's like closer to hip hop. I don't know. We make the music that comes out of us. 2 minutes to set up a database on all of these? No, I think we'll just like look at all of them, because basically this is the point that we're at, right? So we've scaled in this way, and now we need to scale our database. What do? Well, first we could learn about sharding. Risky Wikipedia lookup of the day. Shard, database architecture. A database shard, or simply a shard, is a horizontal partition of data in a database or search engine. Each shard is held on a separate database server instance to spread the load. Okay, this is one way of scaling databases. I think I talked about this, but you could do it with any like SQL database. It has the ability to do that. Or you could just pick one of these providers and they handle all of that for you. So they talk about front-end cache instead of DB lookup. No, and like that's just like a whole nother aspect of like scaling as well. Is like, not only would you have like this load balancer, you also could have a cache thingy. What's that thing called? Is it like memcached? Memcache, a distributed memory object system. Is this it? High performance distributed memory object caching system. Yeah, so you could use something like this, or probably even Redis, but basically any incoming requests that you know don't require frequent updates, you could cache those. We'll just call this a cloud cache of some kind. It could be memcache, it could be Redis, but basically if the incoming requests can be served from a cache, you serve it from there instead. And then those lookups are super quick because it doesn't even require a server run or a DB lookup, because you know that like the data isn't stale and you can just serve it directly from the cache. That's another scaling aspect, because then you don't even need a database lookup. You just serve it directly from the cache. Yeah, exactly, and that's a much better said by Acid Spark. This specific page or this specific thing is going to be requested 300 times a day, and it only gets changed once a month. Put it in the cache. You don't need a backend server to serve a custom request. You don't need a database lookup. You have a cache that serves that, and that lets you scale as well, because then you're not having to spin up a serverless function or make a database request. Yeah. What's up with all these gradient logos? I don't know. Okay, but we're going to read about each one of these and see what they provide. So SurrealDB is the ultimate cloud database for tomorrow's applications. Develop easier, build faster, scale quicker. With a SQL-style query language, real-time queries with highly efficient related data retrieval, advanced security permissions for multi-tenant access, and support for performant analytical workloads. Did they coin a new term, NewSQL? Never heard of NewSQL in my... Oh! They have a Wikipedia page. NewSQL is a class of relational database management systems that seek to provide the scalability of NoSQL systems for online transaction processing. And for those of you that don't realize it, this is Wikipedia. I just have a custom theme on Wikipedia. Here. This one. This is the theme that I'm using. I mean, I think I've said that multiple times today. It's like, oh, they have a Wikipedia page? I guess it's a thing. I'd never heard of the term NewSQL. Many enterprise systems that handle high-profile data, financial and order processing systems, are too large for conventional relational databases, but have transactional and consistency requirements that are not practical. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the developer documentation. Let's see what it would take to get set up with SurrealDB. So you need a server. You're going to start the server. You're then going to connect to it with a post request. Interesting. So this database comes built in with like an HTTP server. Very interesting. And then there's also the Surreal query language. So this is a custom query language. It looks kind of like SQL. It's probably a subset of SQL. No joins. Due to the power and flexibility which can be achieved with record IDs in SerialDB, the need to use joins is removed. Instead, queries can perform complex multi-table and multi-depth fetches depending on the record IDs stored within each record. Yeah. And hello, it's Rufio. Thank you very much for the raid. Welcome in. You're from 100 Devs, right? Welcome in. Welcome in. yeah, we're talking about serverless and edge databases, basically databases that scale. But welcome in, Raiders. Glad to have you. What were you working on? Code Wars and Chill. Nice. Welcome in. So earlier in the stream, we started talking about scaling and why things like serverless exist and like how serverless can scale up. And we talked about horizontal scaling versus vertical scaling. All of these things, if you're a beginner, you probably don't even need to worry about. But that brings us to the idea of, okay, well, if you're scaling your server, how are you going to scale your database? And that's why we're talking about these things. And you can see in my diagram, this is the CJ zone of ignorance. I have quite a bit of experience like doing Lambda functions and like horizontal and vertical scaling. I don't have much experience at all actually scaling a database. Oh, nice. You wrote an article on serverless. Cool. If you want to link it in the chat, feel free. Okay. This seems cool. I think it is a common thing for like most of these database providers. Like they have their own custom query language that takes from existing query languages like SQL and such. I guess what I'm curious about is the data model like, how do you define a table? And if it's not a table, is it a document store? And then you can use a type when specifying numeric values. Oh yeah, no worries, hello. It seems cool. So like I guess where I'm coming from is like if I were looking for a scaled database solution, I would try to find something that fits with what I've already done before. So something that is SQL based. The post-SQL era has arrived. Has it though? Has it though? Okay, so this is interesting. So EdgeDB is powered by the Postgres query engine under the hood with a GraphQL-like schema core. Interesting. I think PlanetScale lets you still write SQL, right? Like I think if I had from what I know about all of these things, PlanetScale, I believe, you still use like a regular plain old SQL database. Yeah, like that. I know this. I've written SQL before. That's how you create a table. That's also how you insert data. Yeah. So from what I've seen, like PlanetScale gives you the scaling. you get the scaling, but you can use what you know about SQL databases. Like just from reading the initial docs here, it is new. Like there's newer concepts here. Like I've never seen the set keyword in SQL statements before. So this was talking about like create person, set children. Create person, set newsletter. Oh, okay. So like this creating a person, I don't even know what to call it. Object, document, record. It's creating a person and setting a specific property on that person. Interesting. SerialDB records can store objects with no limit on the depth and nested objects or values within. So create a person, give its metadata. And that's like a JSON object. You can also have arrays too. Cool. This is so much. I mean, I'd have to spend some time with this, and then also I would go through their docs and maybe even they're getting started on like an example app of how you would use this. But it seems cool. SerialDB. All right. The other one that Deverdie asked about was EdgeDB. We did look at the page here, so you need to, I guess, install it locally. And then you define your schema. So they have their own schema definition language. Is this interactive? Wow, this is cool. I like this. The fact that you can like define your schema and then you instantly get a little UI for it, that's pretty cool. I mean, this kind of reminds me of like Prisma schemas, a little bit anyways. And I guess even like GraphQL. And that's what it says it's GraphQL-like, so that's interesting. The schema that does more so you don't have to. We'd have to look, Alvidoodle, and actually that's a good term to introduce people to, is ACID compliance. And so this stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. And typically, when you have a database, you want it to be ACID compliant, because you want it so that like if data if some query or insert fails, it should be able to roll back to a previous state. I can't pretend to know exactly how to describe all of these things, but basically, these are aspects of a database system that say that yes, it's reliable for all of these different types of operations. And for a while, MongoDB actually wasn't ACID compliant. I believe they're ACID compliant now. Oh, here they go. They have a whole article talking about what is ACID. So you can see it there. But it used to be that MongoDB was not ACID compliant, but now they are. So yeah, and I have no idea if these are. A query language that composes. Cool. Designed for devs, not suits. Suits is a newer term that I'm seeing. Not newer. It's a term that was used a long time ago, but I'm seeing it thrown around more these days. Like it's just to describe business people, to describe the business or the more like corporate people. Suits, because they typically wear like a tie and a suit. But that used to be a term thrown around all the time for like startups and stuff like that, because like, yeah, we're not suits and all, I don't know. Okay, it's a whole lot of new syntax, and it seems daunting. So like for both of these solutions that we just looked at, SurrealDB and EdgeDB, like they're a whole new concept. Like you basically have to learn how to structure your data within them. You have to learn their query language, their schema syntax, which is fine. I think if I were building an app that I knew really needed to scale in this way, I would do my research and I would try to differentiate between them and figure out what works best for what I'm trying to do. But then that brings us to PlanetScale, which lets us use SQL, which I do know because I've done a lot of SQL stuff. It says MySQL compatible serverless database platform. I don't want to sign up. I just want to read the docs. And we actually already looked at the getting started, which was basically, let's write some SQL code. So I really like that. I'm curious how does it scale? So they have the serverless JavaScript driver. And I guess that's something that I didn't talk about earlier, is one of the ways that this was solved was to have a database driver that would basically pool connections and handle multiple connections. So you essentially, it's almost like you have a load balancer for your database, where if a bunch of queries are coming in, they all go to the load balancer, and then from there, that's just like one or two requests, or one or two direct connections to your database. Am I using the right term there? Does anyone know, what do you call a load balancer for a database? Is it literally called a load balancer? But there's essentially a way to put something in front of the database that all of the requests come into. Connection pooling, is that what it is? Cool. We'll just call it a connection pool. Because you actually could do that, and actually I'll just rename this. So this becomes the connection pool that in turn makes the direct connection to the database. And so with serverless or with edge functions, this makes a lot of sense because you have a bunch of functions that spin up that are going to be making a lot of connections to this connection pool, and then the connection pool essentially balances the number of connections in the load to the actual database. Yeah. Is it vital to keep up with every technology? No, I mean, so it depends though, right? Like if you know that you're going to be like leaving your current job soon and you want to be relevant, then you probably should get up to date on the latest stuff. But that said, like not every company is using all of the latest stuff, so you might even just do a quick job search to see the types of companies that you might want to work at and see what they're using. But I think you have to be really pragmatic about it because you can get just overwhelmed with the amount of new stuff. And at the end of the day, we're just trying to build apps, right? So like if you can still build apps with the current tech that you know, and also like if you still have that learning skill, so if you get hired somewhere and you are required to learn something new and you can learn it, great. Learn it on demand. I think that's one of the things that I demonstrate on this stream, and what I've been doing my whole career is if I need to know something, I'll learn it. But I don't try to like hoard technologies. I don't try to just learn all the stuff all at once, even if I'm not going to use it. I learn it if it interests me or if I know that I need to use it. So learn on demand is my advice. Won't hurt to keep up with new tech. You might find something useful. That's the other cool thing too, is if you like technology and programming in general, like when you find this stuff, it might seem interesting to you, and then you can like start diving into it and learning more about it. Is it best to know front end or back end, and can you go right into full stack? So yeah, full stack is a very large general term. It typically does mean front end and back end, but it can even start getting into system design, architecture, deployment, DevOps. Like full stack is a very, it's a term. It can mean a lot of things. I would say like typically it is easier for beginners to just learn the front end first, because then once you start to learn about the front end and then you start to see, oh, websites are using or making requests somewhere. Where are they making a request to? A backend. I can build my own backend? Oh, okay. So now I can have a front end and a backend. They talk together. And then how do I store data on a backend? A database? Oh, so now I start to learn about databases. So that's typically the process you see. Like you'll learn front end, then back end first. But there's nothing stopping you from learning all of it. I think one of the things you can do, like if you're trying to build your own app, is this idea of did I say full stack is a term? It's a term. It's definitely a term. This idea of feature slices. It comes from the agile world, but like when you're implementing a feature, you first like you let's say you build out the backend, you build out the schema for the table where that's going to store the database. You build out the backend endpoint. You build out the front end view that's going to be calling that endpoint, and now you have a single feature that touches the front end and the back end. It's a slice of your app. So this is a very hard question to answer. Like, what do you want to know? Like, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago. Like, learn on demand. Like, learn about backends when you need to make your own backend, and learn about front ends when you need to make your own front end. Yeah. Welcome in, Writable Llama. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not always that I'm very clearly pointing out this is stuff that I don't know, but I think that's, I mean, for any like good any good developer is fairly humble, right? Because you have to know your knowledge gaps. Otherwise, you are what do I want to say here? You're lying to yourself, or you're potentially like you could get yourself in a real pickle, right? If you say you know something and think you actually know something when you actually don't, you have to be honest with yourself, because that's when the learning starts, right? If you know that, yeah, actually I don't know how to shard a database, or I don't know about these scaling stuff. That's a learning opportunity because I've admitted that I don't know it. Now I know that's a gap that I could potentially fill. And that's the mindset you need to have for everything, which goes against a lot of what we were taught when we were growing up, and how like you want to know everything and you want to be the smartest person and you don't want to admit that you don't know certain things. But if you can't admit that you don't know something, then it's going to be really hard to learn that thing. Yeah. I learn if I found something interesting if somebody pays me for it. Yeah, so exactly. If your job is asking you to do something or if you found it interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's another aspect. So if you're newer and you're trying to figure out, do I do newer stuff or older stuff? The really cushy jobs and the really secure jobs are actually at large enterprises. So like really big companies. Think banks, insurance companies, oil companies. What else? All of these really big industries, because they've been around for so long, they're using stacks that are a few years older, if not 5-10 years older, because it doesn't make sense for them to rewrite their entire infrastructure when things change. Yeah, especially like governments or government contracting companies, all of them are using older technologies because that stuff is tried and true. It's tried, true, tested. They know it works. They're not going to take a gamble on newer tech. So if you're finding a job in those kinds of industries, then you actually don't have to know the newer stuff. But if you're trying to find a job at like the latest startup or even some of like Fang, I think like Fang companies still have a lot of legacy apps and do like enterprisey kind of things. However, their newer apps and newer things that they launch are using like newer tech. Yeah. What are good resources to keep up to date? So I started this subreddit, multi-Reddit. It's called Stay Relevant. And I actually started this back in 2015. It was right before I started looking for a new job after I had left my previous one. And I was like, I don't even know what I want to do next. So Stay Relevant is roughly 100 subreddits all combined together. Agile, algorithms, Angular, Ansible, Awk, Bash, C programming, all of this like programming related stuff. And so if you go to this URL, it's essentially a combination of all of those subreddits. And Reddit typically seems to be the thing that is like on the somewhat bleeding edge, right? So this is a way to kind of aggregate all of that together. And so I peruse this every now and then. Keeps me somewhat up to date. Yeah. I used to work with you, GNT? Please do not reveal where or anything like that. But hello if I used to work with you. Cool. Honestly, DM me here on Twitch or on Discord. I'll say hi. What was the top post? I didn't even see. This one or this one? Oh, I had programming humor on this list of Stay Relevant, but r/programming humor has just blown up. There's definitely more people there than there are actual programmers. And so when I would look at this feed, it would just be nothing but memes. I probably need to get rid of programming horror too. I think Swift actually lets you use like I don't even know the right term, but like ASCII characters. I don't know. This is technically ASCII too. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes full stack means you'll be DevOps, QA, designer, analytics, and also fix printers. Yeah. Latin? Latin. UTF-8? UTF-8. Non-Latin characters. Yeah, I mean, we touched on Web3 a little bit earlier. Like, so for one, I was baffled that they actually have their own Wikipedia article. So it must be real, right? Oh, they have a section on buzzword. Liam Proven, writing for the Register, concludes that Web3 is a myth, a fairy story. It's what parents tell their kids about the night if they want them to grow up and become economists. Yeah, I don't think you have to be that negative about it. And Eddie, thank you for the 18-month resub. I just think like there is a lot of hype around crypto in general, and so like this is kind of tacking onto that hype and into the idea that eventually apps might all just be distributed. But I don't think we'll ever reach a point where everything is a distributed app. I think some things make good candidates for distributed apps. But yeah. Yeah. How often do I come across micro frontends? Never. The only time I heard about micro frontends was a YouTube thing by what's his name? Jack Harrington. Yeah. And I mean, he has some awesome resources on it. I think he's even written like a generator tool for micro frontends and stuff like that. I think it makes sense if you have a lot of like smaller products and a lot of if you're working at a company with a lot of different teams of developers, where they each can have their own little app, but they all feed together into a larger app. I've never worked on a team that big or needed anything like that. I mean, you could consider the Coding Garden website a micro front end because the homepage is built with Svelte. And then there's all of these little sub pages that are just like, some of them are, I think this might be vanilla JavaScript, like the video site. There's also the commands, which I think is vanilla. And then there's also, there's a bunch of stuff hosted on. I mean, there's the schedule. It's a simple little landing page. But like technically, I could have written this as one big React app with a bunch of like subcomponents and stuff like that. But the only piece of this that has a build process is the homepage because I wanted these little animations here. But this isn't the best example because like this is just an app that only I work on. I mean, it is open source, but I don't know. But each one of the separate things that I went to is its own code base. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the code base that exists outside of it. And that's a similar thing that you can do with micro frontends, but you can use modern technologies. Like, each one could be a little React app, or you could even have components that are shared between the different micro frontends and stuff like that. Yeah. Learn some React, learn some Node, then you're full stack. Yeah. What do you got, Oscar? Is this on r/programming humor? Because if it's not, it absolutely should be. So this has to do with the fact that Uber recently, they got hacked. They got exposed. And now if you look at their job postings, they're looking for application security, enterprise security, investigations. That's kind of hilarious. Did you take that screenshot yourself, Oscar? Yeah. You can't learn that what you think you know. Yeah, absolutely. And Pandalion, thank you for that Prime sub. Senior Threat Detection Engineer. Wow. Honestly, like this is a whole potential career avenue that I never went down because like so I have a computer science degree, and in university I learned I took some at the time there were no specializations in computer science at the university that I went to. So it was just get a computer science degree. Now they have computer science with a specialization in artificial intelligence, or computer science with a specialization in bioinformatics, or computer science with a specialization in computer forensics. I didn't have that, but I did take a course on computer forensics, and I took a course on network security, and I am generally interested in like security related things. So this could have been a whole different path for me. I could have been a security person. And I still could be. I don't know. I like doing this. I'm going to keep doing this as long as I can. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Okay. Let's finish talking about all of these databases, and then I'm going to go because I have been live for 3 hours. So PlanetScale looks cool. Like I'm interested in how, and that's where we kind of left off, is how do they make it so that this SQL database now can be used in serverless functions or in on the edge. Enable a database for the serverless driver. And Denif, thanks for that Prime sub. Thanks for being here. Serverless driver credential. So you create some credentials, and then you pull in this library called Connect from PlanetScale database. So my guess is that this would be a database driver that does connection pooling and like can share connections between instances. And that's basically how they get it to scale to multiple serverless instances. Yeah. And then there's some potential compatibility issues with MySQL directly. It'll be interesting if somebody does this with Postgres as well, because I really like Postgres. I use it for most things. So if you could make Postgres a planet scale database, maybe they're working on it here as well. I don't know. So that seems interesting. Of all the ones we looked at so far, if I had to choose, I would probably choose this one. It seems the closest to all of the stuff that I've done before, with the added benefit of being able to scale. So that's that. Okay. I have heard of Fauna. I know they're more of like a NoSQL database or a document database. The cool thing about it, how easy it is to create a branch and opening a PR to merge. Yeah, I guess that's the other interesting thing of like these things that are open sourced. Like they have a GitHub. And then, and it's built on top of VTest. That's another thing that I heard about recently. Don't know what it is. A database clustering system for horizontal scaling of MySQL. So, Planet Scale is essentially built on top of this, and it's like horizontal scaling of a MySQL database as a service, essentially. Hasura, I don't believe to be in the same category, because as far as I know about Hasura, it just takes a Postgres database and turns it into a GraphQL API. We specifically would want to look at like how they handle serverless functions or how they handle scaling. And I don't know the answer to that. So maybe, but as far as I know, it's mainly about taking a Postgres database and turning it into a GraphQL API. But yeah, okay. So we actually just touched on SerialDB. It looked interesting. There's just a bunch of new syntax that I'd have to learn. FaunaDB, I think from what I've read about it, is closer to like MongoDB because it is a document store. But apparently it's a document relational store. So you have documents, but they actually can have enforced relationships. Yeah. My subscriber alert is being used on HelloFresh streams? Really? I didn't take it from them. This is literally a water dropping. And I put I think I put a little bit of reverb on it. Sounds. It's this. I don't want to download it. I don't know. But is it similar to the notification used by those other things? Yeah. I'll take a look at that. I had no idea. Well, I am not sponsored by HelloFresh. The Edge Query Builder provides a code-first way to write fully typed Edge queries. Yeah, it seems nice. I mean, this seems close, like somewhat similar to like Prisma, and I think that's the other interesting thing about Planet Scale is because it is MySQL, you can use any ORM or any driver that you're used to for it. And Prisma is a library that it's an ORM, an object relational mapper. But you just point it at a SQL database. So technically you should be able to use Prisma and then point it at like a Planet Scale database. Whereas with those other ones, you have your own client library. Now, I don't think Pocketbase falls into the same category of like working with or databases for edge functions. And then let's see what, this is Cockroach. We were looking at Fauna. Let's see what Fauna has to say about edge functions. A lot of these things have a pricing structure. Are they generally free to use for educational use? It depends. It depends on the product. I think for the ones we looked at, they do have a free tier of some kind. And then as you scale, you would pay more. And that makes sense for their business model because their customers are apps that need to scale. So eventually they know that their customers are going to need to pay. But I think a lot of these do have a free tier. Yeah. And welcome in, Electrothermal. Happy Monday to you too. All right. I need to go. Honestly, I need to go. It's past my lunchtime. I'm going to quickly look through these other things. So FaunaDB seems fine. They didn't have anything at a glance. I don't see anything specific about like how they handle scaling. And I think it's just like it can handle a bunch of connections, so it scales. I don't know. I'm showing my ignorance right now. I apologize, Fauna, if you're watching. I don't know how to talk about it. There's also Amazon Redshift. So fastest, easiest, most widely used cloud data warehouse. Uses SQL to analyze structured and semi-structured data across warehouses. I don't know if that fits into the same category. And then we have Cockroach. They've tweeted at me before. But like I said, I don't know much about database scaling. So familiar, consistent SQL. Use the tools in the language you use today and guarantee your data is always correct. This seems like somewhat of a competitor to like PlanetScale in that like you're using SQL, but for more scalable stuff. Yeah. Thanks, Deprecated. Thanks for the question. So this question originated here, but we're kind of exploring it together because I don't know much about it. Horizontal scale for reads and writes. Eliminate write bottlenecks. Every node can service both reads and writes so that you can scale query throughput and database capacity by simply adding more endpoints. Scaling for 11 billion documents. Guides to scaling your cluster. Add or remove nodes from your cluster. Wow. Okay. Never manually shard again. And ultimately, I think this is what we were getting at, right? Because I talked about it earlier. Like you could scale your SQL database yourself if you sharded it. Every database management system has a built-in way of sharding, and you could do that. But what they're saying here is you don't have to do that because we handle that for you. So this is cool. This is also something that I would potentially try in the future if I was trying to do this. This or PlanetScale. Looks good. Neo4j, I think just in general is just a graph database. This is a whole other thing, this high availability SQLite. That just sounds like an oxymoron. Like SQLite is meant to be a flat file database, but they've essentially made it so that it can be highly available. And so this is a whole other concept where all of your little Lambda functions or all of your little edge functions actually have their own little database just like sitting right there next to them. So each one gets their own little database. And then there's a way to keep each of these little databases in sync. Somehow, I don't know, that's a whole other thing. Is that what Neo4j is? I don't know. So DQLite looked interesting. MariaDB Galera cluster. So this is just clustering for MariaDB, and MariaDB is an open source implementation of MySQL. So that's a thing. Never heard of TinyBird. Build real-time applications on data at any scale. Yeah. Through SQL-based API endpoints. Docs. Guides. I mean, this has SQL syntax too. Cool. I don't know. I'd have to look into it in the future. We learned this. So the word of the day is new SQL. Try to use it in a sentence today amongst your friends or coworkers. NoSQL is a class of relational database management systems that seek to provide the scalability of NoSQL systems for online transaction processing workloads while maintaining the ACID guarantees of traditional database systems. Cool. That's the word of the day. We talked about a bunch of other news. We didn't get to dive into this other stuff, but I'm sure you'd heard about it elsewhere. And we also didn't get to try PenPot. I definitely want to try PenPot at some point because it was in the news that... that's one way to use it in a sentence. But because Figma is being acquired by Adobe, a lot of people started talking about PenPot, which is an open source version of it. So we're going to have to look at this in the future. All right, that's all I have for you. Thanks, everyone, for hanging out. Thank you for all your questions, your insights, everything that you shared. It's cool to know that there's lots of people in the chat that are building apps for millions of users. That's cool to know. I don't do that, but it's cool that you do that. Not all news is equal. No. Oh, I see what you're saying. New sequel? All right. I have some parting words. Yeah, check out my YouTube. I upload all of the streams there, and then there'll also be some edited videos that get uploaded at some point this week. Follow me on Twitter. I tweet every time I go live. That's usually about it. Every now and then I'll ask for like some community contribution, some kind of thing that I want you to respond to. Check out the schedule. I am streaming every single day this week. Every day. So I'll be live tomorrow, same time. I'm an hour over apparently right now, but I'll be live tomorrow at the same time. And it's going to be more of a chill stream tomorrow. We're just going to be working on my apps and overlays, all of the stuff that runs the stream. So this is a chat app that I wrote from scratch. We're going to be working on that. All of the various alerts and overlays I wrote as well, so we might need to do some fixes there. But that's what we're doing tomorrow. 2 streams tomorrow. So in the morning we're doing that, and then in the evening I'm going to build a view app. This might be a 2-parter. I might have to do this Tuesday and Wednesday evening, but check it out there. And then what else do I want to say? Oh yeah, I talked about it earlier, but I might be streaming here tonight, which is my music project. So we usually go live around like 8 or 9 p.m. my time, so roughly 7 hours from now we go live. So if you're interested in that, tune in there. That's it. That's all. Let's go on a raid. I don't know who we're gonna raid, but whatever they do. Whoever they are, show them lots of love. Use that raid message if you are a sub. You can use this raid message if you're not a sub. And if you like what they're doing, drop a follow. All that good stuff. Yeah, so take care, everyone. You're awesome. Thanks. Have a wonderful week. If I don't see you later in the week, have a wonderful week. And wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And until next time, here's this.